Chapter 1101. As he fought against it, endless pain shot through Su Ming's body. That pain came from his body being squeezed to the point of crumbling. It was an indescribable pain that made even his soul shatter under the mighty pressure. However, there were times when pain was the source of a person's madness. At that moment, Su Ming was in that state. The more pain he felt, the redder his eyes became, and the more the god ascension nectar fused into his blood. Ikang. At that moment, Su Ming no longer cared whether he was exposed or not. He had made a promise to the resentful Wei, so he had to fulfill it. As Su Ming spoke, his Ikang clone let out a loud bang, and a projection appeared. Under it, Su Ming rushed forward, and with it, he crashed straight into the mighty pressure. With a bang, Su Ming coughed up blood. The Ikang projection behind him crumbled, but it completed the descent of the Ikang clone. Once it appeared and fused into his body, Su Ming brought forth his strongest offensive power and took another step forward. With it, cracks immediately appeared on his body. Blood covered it, but as he threw his head back and laughed, he did not wipe off the blood at the corners of his mouth. Instead, he summoned the clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole. The fusion of the clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole caused Su Ming's physical power to reach its peak. When he took another step forward, the world roared, and he coughed up a huge mouthful of blood. His vision became blurry, and his body was already covered in blood. The thick fragrance of the god ascension nectar spread out. Under the stimulation of the nectar, Su Ming's damaged body was swiftly repaired. A flourishing life force filled his body, and it was as if even if he was 4 people at the same time, he would not allow himself to die under this life force. The god ascension nectar, the Ikang clone, and the clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole allowed Su Ming to take his 4th step. All of this might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, from the moment Su Ming appeared to the moment he took his 4th step, everything had happened in the span of a few breaths. At that moment, when he took his 4th step, Su Ming appeared in front of the exhausted and nearly dead resentful Wei. Su Ming stood there covered in blood. At that moment, he seemed to have turned into the blazing sun in the land, causing all the people to be unable to help but look at him. Flame Fiend's progenitor was already dumbfounded. His mind was blank. He stared at Su Ming, at the unfamiliar face, then at the body of the supreme treasure. He came to a vague understanding. However, almost at the moment this epiphany appeared, he was immediately stimulated by the Ikang presence spreading out from Su Ming's body and the god ascension nectar. His breathing quickened, and disbelief appeared on his face. Due to Su Ming withstanding the mighty pressure head-on, this scene stirred up a storm that crashed against Flame Fiend's progenitor's heart. The people in the body of the supreme treasure were also in shock. Among them, Su Hui was the calmest, but the expressions of Xian Shang, Yin Yu, Yin Yu, Yin Yu, and Yin Yu instantly turned chaotic. They had originally thought that Su Ming was already very strong, but at that moment, when they looked at him, their thoughts were overturned. It was especially so for progenitor Long Hai. His eyes sparkled a few times. He might have been able to see through the body of the supreme treasure, but he had not been able to tell that Su Ming had so many secrets hidden within him. As for the god ascension nectar, even he longed for it. Su Ming stood in front of the resentful Wei and lifted his head to look at the golden blade that the white-robed teenager had brought down with great difficulty. He did not know that at that moment, the resentful Wei was behind him and was staring at his back quietly. When it had cast him a glance, just then, Su Ming had remembered his promise. At that moment, the resentful Wei looked at Su Ming and remembered the promise Su Ming had given it in the past. Right then, Su Ming was using his actions to fulfill that promise, even if the price he had to pay was incredibly great. Su Ming's appearance caused the pupils of the white-robed teenager, who had turned golden, to shrink, but the golden blade that was slashing down did not stop. It charged towards Su Ming, and once it landed, Su Ming threw his head back and roared. Even if his body was about to shatter, he still lifted his left hand, formed a seal, and pointed swiftly at the incoming blade. With it, Su Ming executed his strongest origin divine ability: winter, autumn, summer, and spring. It was his life matrix art, the flames of summer. A thick sea of fire instantly erupted from Su Ming's blood and fused into his left index finger, turning into a finger of fire that pushed down on the incoming golden blade. Su Ming's determination, his promise, and the eruption of all his willpower was contained in that one finger. At the instant it crashed into the incoming golden blade, the world roared. Loud booming sounds shook the sky and earth. The impact turned into a wave of impact that swept out in all directions. Su Ming coughed up blood and fell back, but he managed to forcefully stop himself in front of the resentful Wei. His face was pale, and, as his body trembled, the golden blade's light became slightly weaker, but it still came crashing down on him. At that moment, Su Ming was already gravely injured. If he did not have the God Ascension Nectar, then even if he did not die under the blade just then, he would definitely not be able to stand up. Yet at that moment, the power that allowed him to stand was the God Ascension Nectar in his body. The domineering nature of the God Ascension Nectar was a strength that could allow a person to regain their life force no matter what happened. In fact, it could be clearly seen that the God Ascension Nectar seemed to have turned into thin threads that connected Su Ming's entire body together. If anyone could see into Su Ming's body, then they would also be able to see that there were countless damaged parts in his organs, and even his soul that were being guided by the power of the God Ascension Nectar. This was the God Ascension Nectar. He could not retreat. Behind him was the resentful Wei he had promised not to let die. At the instant the golden blade closed in, Su Ming swiftly closed his eyes. He lifted his right hand and pointed at the sky, then lowered his left hand to push down on the ground. Between the past and the future is destiny. This was a divine ability he had not used for a long time. As Su Ming spoke, a purple-haired man appeared above him, and on his lower left was a baby with his eyes closed. The two figures swiftly overlapped with Su Ming's body, and a powerful ripple erupted from his body with a bang, causing his hair to fly. His appearance instantly changed, and he turned into a boy of 7 or 8 years of age. With a single move, he rushed out and charged towards the incoming golden blade. The boy Su Ming had turned and lifted his right hand and formed a seal. When he pointed forward, the incoming golden blade immediately looked as if it had stopped in midair, then as if it had sliced through space. It let out a loud bang and charged toward Su Ming. In the midst of that bang, the boy Su Ming tumbled backwards and coughed up blood again. The injuries on his body became even worse. The test just now had allowed him to know that the golden blade could not change the trajectory of time. However, after the battle, the white-robed teenager had long since been reduced to only skin and bones. His body was so thin and frail that it looked as if he would die from a single gust of wind. There was an incredibly thick aura of death around him, and it filled the air, a sign that he was swiftly moving towards death. He glared at Su Ming, and the blade in his hand was already trembling. He was also gritting his teeth and persevering. This was a battle where whoever fell first would be the one to die. When Su Ming moved back, red filled his eyes, and a hint of madness appeared in them. His destiny transformation was useless. Then what would happen if he changed again when he transformed? Su Ming had thought about this before, but he had never tried it. Yet at that moment, he wanted to try it. As he moved back and stood once again in front of the resentful Wei, Su Ming lifted his head and closed his eyes. He lifted his right hand towards the sky, then brought his left hand down to press down on the ground. Once again, he went through the transformation of destiny. Between the past and the future is the present. Su Ming's voice was hoarse, but the moment he said those words and the transformation of destiny was activated in his body once again, pain that surpassed that of before suddenly appeared on Su Ming's face, and he threw his head back and roared. As he roared, a large part of his skin was torn apart, and blood gushed out. However, a presence that had never appeared before erupted from Su Ming's body. This eruption caused Su Ming's hair to instantly turn white. As his face changed, He turned from a boy of 7 to 14 years of age to a teenager of 13 or 14 years of age. However, a powerful presence rose from his body and crashed into the world. At the instant Su Ming opened his eyes, endless aloofness appeared in them. 3 breaths. At the instant Su Ming went through the second transformation of destiny, he immediately came to an understanding. He knew that he could only maintain this second transformation for the span of 3 breaths, but during these 3 breaths, the combat power he could bring out, it was no longer the power beneath Mastery Realm, but the power of Mastery Realm. As he moved forward, Su Ming did not hesitate. He instantly closed in on the white-robed teenager, and booming sounds reverberated in the air. 2 breaths later, the two of them tumbled backwards, and Su Ming stood in front of the resentful Wei again. A decaying presence spread out from his body, and his appearance instantly changed. When he returned to his original appearance, he shuddered, and once he coughed up blood, he looked as if he was about to fall. The white-robed teenager also coughed up blood as he fell back. The golden hue on his body disappeared right before Su Ming's eyes, and the golden blade in his hand also turned into golden light. By the looks of it, it was about to scatter at any moment. As he laughed brokenly, the white-robed teenager clearly regained some of his senses. The golden hue in his eyes had already become so faint that it could only be seen faintly. The burning of his blood had already reached its end. I still have one more move. Earthbreaker. The white-robed teenager swiftly seized the golden blade, which was about to scatter, and forcefully gathered up the last of his strength. Su Ming's pupil shrank. When he sucked in a deep breath, he was already prepared to summon the Sand Earthling's progenitor. The Sand Earthling's progenitor still had 2 chances to summon him, but Su Ming did not want to use them readily. If there was a possibility that he would not need to use them, then he did not intend to use them. However, if the white-robed teenager still had the power to fight, then he had to summon the Sand Earthlings. Yet at the instant the white-robed teenager lifted the blade in his hand, it suddenly crumbled, and a dazed look appeared on the white-robed teenager's face. As his body trembled, his chi disappeared without a trace, and he fell swiftly from the sky to the ground. He had already burned all his blood. As he fell, the golden light on his body completely disappeared. The golden light around him also instantly faded away. In fact, to the people in the world outside, the golden light from the 5th kiln had also completely disappeared. The battle ended with the white-robed teenager burning all his blood. Su Ming won. He did not win because he was stronger than the white-robed teenager, but because he had the God Ascension Nectar. He could last longer, and the one who could last until the end of the battle would be the victor. Yet at the instant the white-robed teenager's body fell to the ground, before Su Ming could relax, the ground roared, and a gigantic crack tore open. An endless amount of fire spirits surged out with a bang, as if they had been suppressed for a long time. In the blink of an eye, they filled the entire area. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1102. The appearance of the fire spirits instantly caused the world to turn fiery red. The scorching sea of fire, the intense heat, the brutal expressions of the fire spirits, and the mighty pressure due to their numbers instantly caused the hearts of all the people in the area to tremble. The corpse of the white-robed teenager with the blood of ancient Wu fell in the area where the crack had appeared. Almost at the moment, a large number of fire spirits surged out and their roars shook the sky. His corpse fell deep into the crack and disappeared without a trace. No one dared to chase after him. Even Flame Fiend's progenitor, who longed for the white-robed teenager's corpse, had his expression instantly change when he saw the large number of fire spirits. It would have been fine if these fire spirits were normal, but among them were a dozen something gigantic fire spirits that were nearly as strong as Almighties in Mastery Realm. They were the reason behind the people's expressions changing. As roars echoed in the air, Flame Fiend's progenitor's nascent divinity shrank without any hesitation. A large amount of flames instantly shot out of his nascent divinity and surrounded his entire body. He did not dare to move. Based on his past experiences, if there was no one around him, his method would not be of much use, but if there was someone around him, then he could avoid the fire spirit's slaughter. After all, the thing spreading out his body was also fire. Su Ming's pupils shrank. At that moment, he was already at the end of his rope. There was no way he could dodge. The only thing he could do was to use his fastest speed to take a few steps backwards. Then with a swing of his arm, he put away the heavily injured, resentful Wei into his storage bag. Almost at the instant Su Ming completed this action, the large number of fire spirits that surged out split into two. One of them charged towards the body of the supreme treasure where Xian Shang and the other three were, and the other charged towards Su Ming while roaring. Their brutal expressions, ferocious gazes, and the endless sea of fire spreading out of their bodies made the ground look as if it was about to melt from the heat before they even closed in. These were flames that could burn the world. During the moment of danger, Su Ming gritted his teeth and put away the resentful Wei. Just as he was about to summon the sand spirit to resolve the disaster, a scene that caused his gaze to focus and a strange expression to appear on his face suddenly appeared. The fire spirits charging towards Su Ming froze in midair once Su Ming put away the resentful Wei. It was as if they had come here because of the resentful Wei. Right then, the resentful Wei had disappeared, and as if they could not see Su Ming, they turned their heads around and looked around. Their expressions became brutal again, and as they roared, they rushed towards Flame Fiend's progenitor, who was covered in flames and was trying to pass himself off as real. The pupils of Flame Fiend's progenitor shrank, and he immediately started cursing in his heart. He had used this method many times, and every single time, he would be able to bluff his way through. But this time, he had been discovered. What caused him to feel even more aggrieved was that Su Ming was standing on the ground alone, but the fire spirits did not even spare him a glance. This sort of thing caused Flame Fiend's progenitor to feel aggrieved, but he did not have time to think about it. With a flash, he turned into a long arc and fled into the distance. The sound of air being sliced apart rose into the air, and a large number of fire spirits chased after Flame Fiend's progenitor in a frenzy. At the same time, due to Su Ming's departure, the main soul in the body of the supreme treasure turned back into Xian Shang. When the fire spirits closed in on him, his heart shuddered, and he instantly had the body of the supreme treasure rise from the ground. He turned into a long arc that swiftly fled into the distance, causing the fire spirits to chase after it like they had chased after Flame Fiend's progenitor. Su Ming was momentarily stunned, because all of this had happened in the span of a few breaths. In the beginning, the fire spirits had surged into the sky, but in an instant, the entire place had become empty. All the fire spirits had split up to chase after Flame Fiend's progenitor and the body of the supreme treasure. Only Su Ming seemed to have been completely ignored. Su Ming blinked. He suddenly remembered his previous guess. It seemed like the fire spirits in this place did not harbor any hostility towards him. A faint glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He looked towards the crack in the ground in the distance, but he did not immediately act recklessly. Instead, he sat down cross-legged and circulated his cultivation base to quickly heal himself. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, Su Ming opened his eyes. He had suppressed some of the injuries in his body, and without any hesitation, he charged towards the crack in the ground. He did not care about the white-robed teenager's corpse, but what he cared about was his storage bag, because the Catwoman was clearly in it. If there was a reason behind him and the white-robed teenager fighting to the death, then it was because of the Catwoman. Even though the Catwoman did not have a great relationship with Su Ming, he had taken over everything from Dao Kong, which meant that the Catwoman was also his subordinate. There was no way he would allow her to be used as food. The crack was very big. It was dark inside, and its area was even wider. Su Ming charged into the depths of the crack at full speed. Soon after, when he stepped on the bottommost layer of the crack, his pupils shrank, and he observed his surroundings carefully. This was a secret tunnel. However, the top part of the tunnel had shattered, allowing the fire spirits to rush out. Su Ming looked around him, and his gaze fell on the unmoving corpse of the white-robed teenager not too far in the distance. When he got closer, Su Ming looked at the white-robed teenager whose eyes were still open, but there was no longer any life in them. He had died with his eyes wide open, and he let out a cold chuckle. "You're the first almighty I've killed, but you definitely won't be the last." Su Ming lifted his right hand and swung it. Immediately, the white-robed teenager's storage bag flew out. Once he caught it, he scanned it with his divine sense. Due to the white-robed teenager's death, the storage bag had become ownerless. With his divine sense, Su Ming immediately saw the Catwoman sealed in the storage bag. She was unconscious at that moment, and there was the mark of a centipede at the center of her brows. It was slowly fading away. As he stared at the mark at the center of the Catwoman's brows in the storage bag, a glint suddenly appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Without batting an eyelid, he patted the white-robed teenager's body with his right hand and immediately put away his corpse. Only then did he get up. Almost at the instant he did so, he pointed behind him with his left index finger. However, the divine ability formed by the gust of wind from his finger did not shoot out. Not too far behind him was a fire spirit that was clearly still a baby. It had its eyes wide open and was staring at Su Ming with a dumbfounded expression. The fire spirit was very small and did not even reach Su Ming's knees. It crouched there, and not a single hint of malice could be seen on its face. Instead, it was filled with curiosity. When Su Ming looked towards it, the baby fire spirit immediately took a few steps back, as if it had been frightened by his lifted finger. At the same time fear appeared on its face, there was also bewilderment. Its bewilderment caused it to move a little further forward. When it looked at Su Ming, its expression gradually turned gentle. There was no longer any fear in its eyes, only a comfortable look. This comfortable look caused it to get closer to Su Ming again. When it was several dozens of feet away from him, it charged towards him in a flash. A fierce look appeared in Su Ming's eyes, but he did not dodge. He wanted to verify his guess, which was why he simply allowed the fire spirit to come to him. When he saw the small fire spirit lying on his feet with joy on its face and hugging his calf, a thought appeared in Su Ming's heart. Could it be that this fire spirit is also like the 1,000 feet tall tree? In pensive silence, Su Ming moved, intending to leave the crack. However, the moment he moved, the baby fire spirit immediately let go and swiftly returned to its previous crouching spot. Once it waved at Su Ming, it turned around and disappeared into the tunnel in a flash. A pensive look appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The small fire spirit's intentions were very clear. It wanted him to follow it into the tunnel. After a moment of pensive silence, Su Ming took a step forward and stepped into the tunnel. Just as he expected, once he entered, he saw a fork in the distance. The small fire spirit was waiting there. When it saw Su Ming following it, it immediately grinned and ran into the tunnel again. Just like that, Su Ming followed the baby fire spirit and continued moving through the underground, which was filled with tunnels that made it look like a maze. Time trickled by, and about an hour later, when the fire spirit rushed out, Su Ming closed in, and with just one glance, he saw an incredibly large and empty underground cave. This place was several tens of thousands of feet in size. It was dark all around, but in Su Ming's eyes, he could clearly see that the ground was filled with pits, and there were countless caves on the walls around him. If he compared the underground world to a maze, then this place was clearly the core of the maze. In silence, Su Ming stared at a corner of the ground beneath him. There was half a skeleton leaning against the wall, and in the skeleton's hand was a long spear. The long spear was purple, but when Su Ming took a few closer looks, he immediately saw that the color of the long spear had turned black. It was as if it was in a state between black and purple, and it would occasionally change. There were two old fire spirits around the skeleton. They were clearly very old, and at that moment, they were sitting cross-legged like cultivators. Between them was a chessboard, and there were some chess pieces on it. The two fire spirits were clearly playing chess. At that moment, the baby fire spirit was crouching by the chessboard and waving at Su Ming. A focused glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. In silence, he moved. Since he was already here, he might as well see what was going on. When Su Ming closed in on the chessboard where the two old fire spirits were, he first cast his gaze on them. They did not seem to have noticed Su Ming's arrival. They did not even lift their heads, only thinking about the placement of the chess pieces on the chessboard. This scene was incredibly bizarre. In silence, Su Ming's gaze fell on the chessboard. This was a style of chess he had never seen before. There were only 10 chess pieces on the chessboard, and 5 of them were gray, 4 were white, and only 1 was black. No matter how he looked at it, the black chess piece gave off a feeling that it had appeared out of nowhere. It was filled with a feeling of disharmony. After all, 9 was the extreme, but due to the addition of black, the entire chessboard looked as if it contained a powerful killing intent. The 4 white chess pieces looked as if they were surrounding and attacking the black chess piece to kill it, so that the chessboard would appear harmonious. Su Ming stared at the chessboard. His gaze fell on the black chess piece, and he frowned. Time trickled by. After a moment, the old fire spirit to the right of the chessboard let out a sigh filled with age. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Yen. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1103. Why is it like this? The old fire spirit sighed and shook his head while mumbling to himself. That's right. Why is it like this? Anguish appeared on the face of the fire spirit to the left of the chessboard. You are Su Xianyi's son and an abyss builder. Can you tell me why this game is like this? The fire spirit to the right of the chessboard lifted his head and cast his gaze on Su Ming for the first time. At the instant it looked over, Su Ming's heart trembled. The old fire spirit's eyes might have seemed murky, but there was an indescribable fierceness contained within them. In fact, there was also a mighty pressure in its gaze that was stronger than that of Dust Burner's progenitor. In fact, Su Ming could sense that when the fire spirit looked over, the space around him seemed to have been torn apart in a barely discernible manner. This was an art of the laws of fate. What is this game? Su Ming was silent. He was not surprised that his identity had been recognized. He could already tell that the 2 old fire spirits were the ones Dust Burner's progenitor had mentioned, the ones who already possessed intelligence and incredible power, but did not want to leave the 5th kiln to become a part of Dust Burners. They obeyed the ancient promise and protected the 5th kiln. Since the 1,000 feet tall tree could recognize him and the fire spirits ignored him when they saw him, then it was not strange for the 2 powerful fire spirits who possessed intelligence to be able to recognize him. Your abyss builder's progenitor played a game of chess against Su Xianyi in the 5th kiln when the 4 great true worlds surrounded him. Then he left the 5th kiln and fought against the world outside. Before he left, he laughed long and hard, shook his head. Su Ming's expression was calm. He had gone through far too many things. At that moment, in silence, he stared at the chessboard, especially at the black piece. Time trickled by, and a long, long time passed. You won't understand either. The old fire spirit to the right of the chessboard shook his head and sighed. Su Ming did not speak. He continued staring at the chessboard. Gradually, the fire spirits returned from the world outside. They had originally returned with roars, but once they entered the empty kiln, they fell silent and squatted down in the area. As more and more fire spirits returned, when all the fire spirits appeared, the place was once again occupied by the fire spirits, and the surroundings were illuminated by the faint flames on their bodies. Flame Fiend's progenitor's nascent divinity was seized by 2 fire spirits, whose power was close to that of Almighty's in Mastery Realm. His body trembled, and fear appeared on his face, but when he saw Su Ming in the distance, he was immediately stunned. Su Ming lifted his head and said softly, "This game is very easy to understand." His words immediately attracted the gazes of the 2 old fire spirits. Have you never left the 5th kiln before? Have you obtained your cultivation bases through training? Instead, when you gained intelligence, you gained it naturally as time passed. Su Ming swept his gaze past the 2 old fire spirits. What do you mean? The fire spirit on the left side of the chessboard said in a hoarse voice after a moment of silence. There are 9 worlds in the universe, so it can be seen that 9 is the extreme, but there are not 9 on this chessboard. There's an extra black chess piece, causing the game to no longer be harmonious and showing signs of chaos. The extra black chess piece should be an abyss builder, or more accurately speaking, it was once an abyss builder's progenitor, Su Ming said calmly. There was a sentimental tone in his words that no one else could hear. He lifted his right hand and picked up the black chess piece on the chessboard. Once the black chess piece was taken away, the layout of the chessboard instantly became harmonious. 5 gray and 4 white, giving off a feeling that even though it was incomplete, it was still as round as the universe. Perhaps this is the 9 worlds in the universe. The 4 white chess pieces are the 4 great true worlds, and the 5 gray chess pieces are the other 5 great true worlds that were destroyed in the past and are still in the void. Su Ming shook his head and put down the black chess piece in his hand once again, placing it in its original spot. The 5th true world is not one of the 9 worlds in the universe. Su Ming lowered his head and said softly. In truth, he had come to an understanding about this a long time ago, but only at that moment was he certain of his thoughts. The 5th true world was the 5th and also the 10th. This game is the epiphany of Abyss Builder's progenitor. His long string of laughter is pride, and his shake of his head is regret. He is proud that he messed up a game, but regretful that he did not manage to complete it. He left this game for Su Xianyi to see because he wanted Su Xianyi to continue completing the game. Su Ming said calmly, his expression as calm as ever. Then what did you see? The old fire spirit to the right of the chessboard suddenly asked. He wanted me to continue completing the game. Su Ming fell silent. After some time, he sighed. The secret of the 5th true world had been revealed to him without him even noticing it. In truth, when he thought about it carefully, if all the clues he had discovered in the past were connected into a single line, then this ball of line would depict a secret that was not complicated at all. There was nothing to hide about this secret. This was the truth behind the 4 great true worlds attacking the 5th true world together in the past. Perhaps the 2 old fire spirits truly did not understand, but perhaps they did. If they truly did not understand, then it would be because they had never walked out of the 5th kiln. Perhaps they did not know that there were worlds and kulpas in the cultivation world outside. Worlds were the essence of a world. The essence of a world could only allow a limited number of cultivators to become world planes. It could be compared to positions. There were only a few fixed positions, and once they were occupied, the people who came later would either have to leave to search for the essence of the world in other worlds to obtain its acknowledgement, or they would have to kill and snatch the position. Aside from this, there was no other way. Unless they could bear with their level of cultivation coming to a permanent halt, they would have to choose one of the 2 options. Similarly, as they continued cultivating and obtained the acknowledgement of the essence of the world, they would be able to form plane Kulpa Realm. Once this Kulpa Realm appeared, it would be Lunar Kulpa Realm, and when it gathered together again, it would be Solar Kulpa Realm. This was the law of the universe. All lives could only practice cultivation under this law. Su Ming had been uncertain about the 5th true world before this, because of his inborn ability as an abyss builder. This inborn ability was a blatant snatch. It was a domineering evil, a madness that allowed him to stand above the laws of the universe and ignore them. He did not need the essence of the world, and neither did he need to fuse with 10,000 worlds to form a kulpa, because the power of his possession could surpass everything. It was precisely because of his uncertainty towards his inborn ability that Su Ming formed a guess about the 5th true world in the depths of his heart. He could already imagine how the progenitor of abyss builders, as the prodigy of the current generation, had used his inborn divine ability to possess all lives, overturn the universe, and ignore the laws, allowing his body to reach an incredibly terrifying state. Because of it, it was only natural that he would attract the attention of other powerful warriors, and it would make sense that he would be killed. However, there was still a question in Su Ming's heart. If he could solve it, he would be able to understand everything. The stronger the progenitor of abyss builders was, the more of a threat he would pose to other people, but he would not be able to attract the four great true worlds to attack him together and destroy all the lives in the fifth true world. He had also nearly exterminated all the abyss builders. Even if he had been a baby in his mother's womb at that time, it would have been difficult for him to escape the fate of being cursed. This did not make sense. Unless the progenitor of abyss builders had done something that angered the heavens and the people, forcing the other four great true worlds to take action. But with the progenitor of abyss builders' level of cultivation and wisdom, there was no way he would not know what would happen once he became the center of attention. There was no way he would do something that would incite the anger of the four great true worlds that they could not resolve. There's another possibility. Su Ming lifted his head and looked at the stone wall above him. There was a hint of sentimentality in his eyes. He remembered the Duke of Crimson Flame's words in the past. He had mentioned that the progenitor of abyss builders was only half a step away from becoming a supreme existence. He might only be half a step away, but in truth, his offensive abilities could already allow him to fight against two supreme existences. The Duke of Crimson Flame might have been in Lunar Culpa Realm, but in that era, the cultivators in Lunar Culpa Realm could not see too far ahead. The supreme existence he mentioned was the Masters of Fate, Lives, and Death, but once Su Ming gained an understanding of the Masters of Fate, Lives, and Death, he knew that those in Mastery Realm were also Masters of Fate, Lives, and Death, and it was the same for those in Death Realm. In fact, Sublime Paragons could be said to have come from Masters of Fate, Lives, and Death, but they were different realms, and the difference between them was like heaven and earth. If that was the case, then there was a possibility that the supreme existence was the realm of Sublime Paragons, which meant that the progenitor of abyss builders was only half a step away from becoming a Sublime Paragon. However, his offensive abilities could allow him to fight against two Sublime Paragons. This possibility is that no matter what we practice, there will always be a checkpoint. The breakthrough of this checkpoint is the same as the essence of the worlds that all lives cultivate. There's a fixed position for them. There can only be one Sublime Paragon in each of the 9 worlds in the universe. This is the rule. That's why there are only 4 Sublime Paragons in the 4 great true worlds, and they stand above Culpa Lords like Dao Chun. If the 5th true world was one of the 9 worlds in the universe, then the destruction of that world would not have happened. But the 5th true world is not one of the 9 worlds in the universe. Because of that, once the progenitor of abyss builders becomes a Sublime Paragon, then one of the 4 Sublime Paragons from the 4 great true worlds will definitely die. There are only 4 spots, and they're all filled, but there is one more person who is a great threat to the 4 of them, the progenitor of abyss builders. Su Ming fell silent. This was his guess, but he was somewhat confident that his guess was the true reason behind the 5th true world destruction. He sighed softly and lowered his head to look at the black chess piece on the chessboard. After remaining silent for a moment, a brilliant light shone in his eyes. He lifted his right hand and picked up the black chess piece once again, holding it in his palm. Su Ming originally did not want to take this path, but he knew that it did not matter whether it was Su Xian Yi or himself. As long as they took that step, they would definitely suffer the same fate as the progenitor of abyss builders. If that was the case, then let's fight. A freezing glare appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He clenched his right hand, and the black chess piece disappeared from his palm. Recommending Gung Xian's new book, Qi of the Fierce, book ID 2424881, it said that there's a minor character with his real name in it. Do you guys want to look for him? To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1104. At the instant the black piece disappeared from Su Ming's palm, the 2 old fire spirits by the sides of the chessboard cast each other a glance, then lowered their heads and closed their eyes slightly. At the same time, the other fire spirits in the area also crouched down, as if they had fallen asleep once more. They did not reject or pay any attention to Su Ming, who was standing on the chessboard. Su Ming swept his gaze across the area, and in the end, his eyes landed on the half of the skeleton and the long spear he held in his hand. A glint appeared in his eyes. This person came from ancient times and killed 7 powerful warriors of the fire spirit tribe. Even the 2 of us were not his opponent. In the end, I could only have my people offer us and stir up 3/10 of the 5th kiln's flames to refine him alive. But with his strength, 3/10 of the fire could only melt half of his body and seal his soul in this place. This is because he already wanted to die, or else, if he wanted to leave, we wouldn't have been able to stop him. The long spear in his hand is stained with a large amount of the fire spirit's life force. If you don't worry, this person won't be resurrected one day and rush out of this place. You can take the spear with you. The old fire spirit's voice echoed in the air. Su Ming looked at the half of the skeleton, and after a moment of pensive silence, he took a step forward. When he arrived beside the skeleton, he cast a scrutinizing glance at it, and in the end, he was certain that this person was not Lai Shanxiu. In truth, when he first saw the skeleton, he had made a guess. After all, Lai Shanxiu had a spear known as the Undertaker of Evil. Su Ming had obtained a fake in the past, but he clearly remembered that the real Undertaker of Evil spear was under the Berserker's imperial city to suppress evil. Lai Shanxiu should not have taken it away. At that moment, when Su Ming observed it carefully, his previous guess disappeared. His gaze landed on the long spear in the skeleton's hand, and he swiftly lifted his right hand to seize the handle of the spear. Yet the instant Su Ming touched the long spear that had changed from purple to black, a thick wave of murderous aura spread out from the spear with a bang and charged towards Su Ming's right hand. In an instant, it filled Su Ming's body. The strength of that murderous aura was so strong that it turned into a wave of impact that surged towards Su Ming's mind with loud booming sounds. Under that impact, a dazed look appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Vague pictures appeared in his head. They seemed to be the memories of the spear, and they were displayed right before his eyes. In the image, a middle-aged man dressed in black held a spear in his hand. He was in the underground cave. There was no expression on his face, but his eyes showed that he had no attachment to life. There were countless fire spirits around him, and there were 9 huge fire spirits that exuded the aura of a master of fate, lives, and death. They were fighting against the man. That person's face was expressionless, but with each thrust of his spear, the ground would tremble and the mountains would tremble. As the fire spirits died one by one, in the end, all the fire spirits in the area began chanting incantations at the same time. As they aged visibly, the ground under the middle-aged man's feet roared, and an endless sea of fire gushed out. The picture changed. The middle-aged man appeared in another world. The sky was blue, but once he thrust his spear forward, the entire sky turned black. The hundreds of living beings on the ground crumbled and died at the same time. It could be seen that the world he was in was still one of the dimensions in the 5th kiln. The third picture appeared again. It was in the galaxy. With just one glance, Su Ming saw the 5th kiln spewing out an endless sea of fire in front of the middle-aged man. Clearly, this was the time before he had stepped into the 5th kiln. This picture was a flashback. It depicted the man's memories of being remembered by the spear. The 4th picture instantly appeared in Su Ming's mind. It was the place in the barren lands of divine essence that belonged to the area where the 4 great true worlds were stationed. Su Ming might not know which true world it was, but the middle-aged man in the picture had ropes formed by 5-colored light on his hands. They bound his hands, and there were nearly 100 runic symbols surrounding him like a seal. Behind him were 7 old men. They stared at the man with complicated expressions on their faces before they lowered their heads and bowed to him. The man turned around. There was a hint of gloom and sadness on his face. He lowered his head and looked at his bound hands. Once he opened them slightly, there was a faint red medicinal core in them. He held it tightly and walked into the distance. Su Ming immediately saw the galaxy in the 5th picture. It was incredibly unfamiliar to him. It was not black, but red. It was a red galaxy, and it was a middle-aged man with a long spear in his hand. He let out a shrill laugh and rushed towards a hairless teenager before him. The teenager was dressed in a blood-red long robe. He did not look old, but there was an ancient air about him that could not be described with words. He stared at the middle-aged man coldly, but when he lifted his right hand, the middle-aged man immediately coughed up blood and tumbled backwards. "Are you done?" The teenager's voice was calm, and there was an awe-inspiring air about him that held an air of superiority. "I'd rather not learn the Tao of extermination and not step into Death Realm." The middle-aged man roared and rushed forward again in a frenzy. The picture changed, and the sixth picture swiftly appeared in Su Ming's mind. And it was a cultivation planet. The sky was still red, and on the ground was a middle-aged man holding a woman's corpse in his arms. Tears fell from his eyes as he roared at the sky. The woman's corpse slowly dissipated until it turned into a faint red medicinal core. At the same time, the red-robed teenager walked out calmly, picked up the medicinal core, and handed it to the middle-aged man. "Eat it. Once you eat it, you can practice my sacred sacred's Tao of extermination. Once I take that step, regardless of whether I succeed or not, you will become the next sacred sacred's culpable lord." When Su Ming saw this, he shuddered, but not only did he not let go of the spear in his hand, he instead tightened his grip around it. Then, he slowly lifted it up and took it from the skeleton's hand. Immediately after, the picture in his mind changed again, and the seventh picture appeared. This time, the red-robed teenager stood in a world filled with the chirping of birds and the fragrance of flowers. Before him was a boy about 8 or 9 years old. The boy was kneeling down at the teenager's feet, and with a young voice, he said, "Master." Su Ming's eyes flew open, and he looked towards the skeleton. Then, he slowly brought the long spear in his hand to him. The skeleton's hand was originally holding the spear, and when Su Ming brought it up, the skeleton's hand was also lifted up. If anyone saw this with the naked eye, it would look as if the skeleton had lifted his hand on his own and handed the spear to Su Ming. When the skeleton's hand relaxed, the purplish and black long spear was completely held in Su Ming's hand. With a flash, the spear disappeared from his hand, but a purplish and black ring appeared on Su Ming's right thumb. With a swing of his hand, the ring immediately disappeared and went into hiding. After remaining silent for a moment, Su Ming took a few steps back, wrapped his fist in his palm, and bowed deeply towards the skeleton. He now knew why the fire spirit had said that this person wanted to die. He was the sovereign of true, sacred world, and the disciple of sacred culpable lord. If everything had gone smoothly, this person would have become the next sacred culpable lord. But during this process, an accident had happened. His wife had died because of his master, whom he had idolized since he was young. His body had been exiled to the barren lands of divine essence, but his soul had died a long time ago when the woman in his arms had closed her eyes. Su Ming stared at the skeleton before him. In fact, he did not even know the person's name, but he knew that a person who could reach Death Realm by practicing the Tao of extermination was definitely an almighty in Life Realm. This or a powerful warrior would definitely be so outstanding that he would definitely have a great reputation. Once a person reached Life Realm, there was practically no power that could kill them. Even if there would not be much of it. That was why he was still alive, even if he only had half a skeleton left. However, Su Ming did not sense this person's soul on the skeleton or the long spear in his hand. The memories he had just now were just a remnant will in the spear. When the spear disappeared from Su Ming's hand, the remnant will also disappeared. Once he bowed, Su Ming lifted his head, turned around, and walked towards the exit. The fire spirits around him were still crouching on the ground. They gradually closed their eyes, as if they wanted to fall asleep again. Su Ming took a few steps forward, then stopped for a moment before he looked at Flame Fiend's progenitor, who was staring at him anxiously. "This nascent divinity is mine," Su Ming said calmly. As he said those words, the fire spirit holding onto Flame Fiend's progenitor's nascent divinity let go. Immediately, Flame Fiend's progenitor flew to Su Ming's side. Su Ming lifted his foot, and with a single move, he turned into a long arc that charged towards the exit. Flame Fiend's progenitor followed closely behind him. At that moment, he no longer harbored any ill will towards Su Ming. The two of them moved incredibly quickly through the underground tunnel. Before long, Su Ming rushed out of the crack on the ground. Flame Fiend's progenitor followed behind him. When he rushed out, he cast a glance at the crack on the ground with lingering fear in his heart, then looked towards Su Ming before he wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed to him. "Thank you, fellow Taoist." Su Ming turned around and cast a glance at Flame Fiend's progenitor. He did not speak, but lifted his head to look at the sky. When he scanned the area with his divine sense, he did not find the body of the supreme treasure in the world. Clearly, they had already escaped from the Flame Fiend's pursuit and went to another dimension. However, the bald crane, Su Hui, and progenitor Long Hai had a connection with Su Ming, so he would immediately notice them the moment he stepped into the dimension they were in. Flame Fiend's progenitor hesitated for a moment. He did not dare to mention the matter of the white-robed teenager's physical body they had promised him previously. He was incredibly weak at that moment, and he was afraid that if he brought up this request, he would make Su Ming unhappy. "Let's go," Su Ming said flatly. His divine sense had already found the exit to the dimension. With one move, he charged towards it. Flame Fiend's progenitor quickly followed behind him. After some time, the two of them arrived at the distorted area formed by the exit. They stepped inside and disappeared from the world. What the two of them did not know was that at the instant Su Ming took the purplish-black long spear from the skeleton's hand, the plump and ferocious-looking Zhu Yu Kai in another dimension suddenly shuddered. He slowly turned his head around to look into the distance, and his expression was filled with complicated emotions. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1105. Am I Free? Zhu Yukai lowered his head and sat down quietly on the ground. The world he was in was formed by pools of water. At that moment, there was a pool of water beside him, and he could see the blue sky in it. Zhu Yukai stared at his thick palm. After a long while, he opened his palm, and in it was a faint red medicinal core. He stared at the medicinal core, and his expression slowly turned gentle along with anguish. "No matter who it is, I'm free," Zhu Yukai mumbled. He stood up and cast a glance at the pool beside him. In silence, he walked over. When he stood there and lowered his head to look, he saw his own reflection on the water. His body was as fat as a pig's, and the thick layers of fat on his face made him look hideous. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hair was a mess. As he stared at his reflection, Zhu Yukai closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was still Zhu Yukai. With a single move, he turned into a long arc that charged into the distance. The Abyss Builders in the fifth true world have the art to resurrect the dead. As long as there's a fragment of their soul, they can return to the world. Even though the fifth true world has already disappeared, and even though the Abyss Builders are rumored to have gone extinct, as long as there's a hint of hope, I will definitely go to the fifth true world and find the Abyss Builders so that I can resurrect you. Su Ming and Flame Fiend's progenitor moved through the passage of time. His life force flowed out time and time again, causing Su Ming to feel tired. At the same time, he could not help but remember the promise of 1,000 years made to the cultivators in Western Ring Nebula's foreign land. This promise was also related to time. It had originally existed, but once Su Ming possessed a Kang, it disappeared. However, the prerequisite was that he had to have his Akang clone devour the other Akangs, so that he could continue growing stronger until he completely occupied Western Ring Nebula's foreign land and turned it into his own cave abode. This was Su Ming's goal. At that moment, it was still a little far away, but without a doubt, the Akang clone was already stronger than the other Akangs, but it was still not strong enough to devour all the other souls in one go. As he moved forward, Su Ming moved through one dimension after another. He did not stay for long. Usually, once he arrived in a dimension, he would scan it with his divine sense, and when he did not find the body of the supreme treasure, he would immediately choose to leave. Because of it, Flame Fiend's progenitor suffered. He was a nascent divinity, and each time he moved through the void, he would become even more tired, but he did not dare speak, worried that he would provoke Su Ming's killing intent. As he followed, he sighed repeatedly in his heart. When he arrived in front of the fifth kiln, he had never expected that he would end up like this. In the depths of his heart, he regretted more than once why he had shown hostility towards Su Ming in the beginning. This person is ruthless and cunning. We must not provoke him again. Flame Fiend's progenitor cast a wary glance at Su Ming in front of him. He might not have forced him to follow him, but he could already imagine that if he did anything abnormal, it would be the same as giving Su Ming an excuse to attack. While moving forward, Su Ming suddenly asked, "Once we reach the spirit trudging platforms at the edge of the second layer, the number of dimensions will decrease, and the chances of dimensions containing supreme treasures appearing will increase. How much do you understand about that place? The edge of the third layer in the fifth furnace is relatively safe. After all, the possibility of us running into each other isn't high." When he said this, Flame Fiend's progenitor stopped speaking, and he sighed in his heart again. It's the same between the edge of the third layer and the edge of the second layer. However, the chances of us running into each other are higher, but if we're a little more careful, nothing too big will happen. However, the space between the spirit trudging platforms at the edge of the second layer and the edge of the first layer is incredibly intense. There aren't many dimensions there to begin with, and because of that, there are usually several people who appear in the same dimension at the same time. If there's a supreme treasure, Flame Fiend's progenitor cast Su Ming a glance. It's a fight to the death. I've come to the fifth kiln a few times, and every single time I reach the edge of the second layer and the first layer, powerful warriors will die. Once the few remaining people step into the spirit trudging platforms at the edge of the first layer, they will head to the core of the fifth kiln. Over there, their fights will reach their peak because the 9 strongest supreme treasures will appear there. This sort of temptation is not something a person can resist. But the few times I've come here before, I've at most reached the space between the second and first layer. I chose to leave before I stepped into the core, which is why I'm still alive, Flame Fiend's progenitor said in a low voice. Su Ming's expression was calm, but a thought appeared in his heart. As he moved forward, he walked out of the crack in the dimension and stepped into a new dimension. He had no idea how many dimensions he had walked through. Based on his estimations, he should be about to reach the end of the spirit trudging platforms at the edge of the second layer. Almost at the instant Su Ming appeared in the dimension, his expression changed. At the same time, pleasant surprise also flashed briefly in the eyes of Flame Fiend's progenitor beside him. There was an intense battle going on in the sky of the dimension. Booming sounds reverberated in the air, stirring up a large amount of ripples that turned into impact that swept through the area, causing violent gusts of wind to howl as if the sky was about to collapse and the earth was about to shatter. The two people fighting were the bodies of the supreme treasures were Zhu Yukai, Xin Shang, Su Hui, and the others were. The ground in the dimension was a vast ocean. As the ripples from the battle in the sky spread out, huge waves were stirred up. Those waves rumbled, causing a gigantic whirlpool to appear on the surface of the ocean. As that whirlpool continued rotating, all those who saw it could see the bottom of the ocean with just one glance. There was a statue at the bottom of the ocean. It was a strange statue with 3 heads. Its entire body shone with a white light, and it looked like a piece of jade. It stood at the bottom of the ocean, and white light spread out from it to illuminate the sky. There were nearly 100 ferocious sea dragons surrounding the whirlpool. They would occasionally lift their heads and roar at the sky, but they did not dare get close to the white statue. The supreme treasure. Flame Fiend's progenitor immediately said. This was the first time Su Ming had entered the dimension with the supreme treasure. The ripples of power and presence spreading out from the treasure clearly surpassed that of the supplementary treasures, causing all those who saw it to be able to tell just how extraordinary it was with just one glance. Of the statue's 3 heads, one was crying, one was laughing, and the last one was enraged. with 3 heads and 1 body in the depths of the ocean. All those who saw it would be tempted, but they would also be unable to help but feel a hint of strangeness towards the treasure. The appearance of Su Ming and Flame Fiend's progenitor immediately attracted the attention of the 2 parties fighting in the sky. The body of the supreme treasure had a calm expression on its face, but the hearts of Xian Shang and his group trembled. Su Hui was very calm. She knew that Su Ming would definitely be able to catch up to them, and when she saw him at that moment, she was not surprised. Progenitor Long Hai was also an old fox. With his age, he naturally knew that Su Ming would be able to find him due to his promise with him. He might have the body of the supreme treasure, but this person was once the main soul, so he would naturally not believe that he did not have any tricks up his sleeves. In truth, besides the bald crane, Su Hui, and progenitor Long Hai, there was also the mark he left on the body of the supreme treasure that could lead Su Ming to this place. That mark was not within the body of the supreme treasure, but outside it. Since he was once the main soul, it was not difficult for him to do these things. Once Zhu Yukai saw Su Ming, his pupil shrank. Su Ming's face was incredibly unfamiliar to him, but when he saw Flame Fiend's progenitor beside him, he turned his head around swiftly and cast a deep glance at the body of the supreme treasure. Xian family's supreme treasure. A fierce glare instantly appeared in Zhu Yukai's eyes. If it was anyone else, perhaps they would not be able to see through it so quickly, but he could. The body of the supreme treasure had arrived here first, and Zhu Yukai had arrived later, which was why they had fought against each other. At that moment, when he saw the unfamiliar face of Su Ming and Flame Fiend's progenitor appear, a glint appeared in Zhu Yukai's eyes. He already knew why he had felt a sense of unfamiliarity when he fought against the body of the supreme treasure just now. Clearly, the body of the supreme treasure had been controlled by the cultivator beside Flame Fiend's progenitor. Besides, Su Ming only needed to look at the person beside Flame Fiend's progenitor to be able to tell just who was in control of the body of the supreme treasure. A barely noticeable glint shone in Zhu Yukai's eyes. Almost the moment he understood the relationship between Su Ming and the body of the supreme treasure, he charged towards the vortex in the ocean on the ground. Judging by the direction he was heading towards the 3-headed statue. He was so quick that he instantly closed in on it. As Zhu Yukai took action, the expression of the body of the supreme treasure with Xian Shang and his group changed swiftly. Just as they were about to chase after him, a brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes. When he lifted his right hand, the ring on his thumb instantly appeared. At the instant, the purplish-black ring shone with light. A purplish-black long spear appeared in Su Ming's hand. When he lifted it, without any hesitation, he threw it towards the charging Zhu Yukai. A whistling sound instantly sliced through the air. The piercing sound was like a woman's shrill weeping. As it reverberated in the air, the body of the supreme treasure immediately froze in midair. Xian Shang and his group let out screams of pain, and their hearts were attacked by that sound. Life-death spear. It's actually here. As Xian Shang screamed in pain, disbelief appeared on his face. In fact, even Su Hui's mind was thrown into chaos. Her divine sense instantly became blank. But that was not all. When progenitor Long Hai heard that piercing sound, his nascent divinity showed signs of becoming unstable, and his heart changed drastically. True sacred worlds wore immortal Chang, He's life-death spear. Zhu Yukai was originally moving incredibly quickly as he charged towards the 3-headed statue, but at the instant the piercing whistling sound traveled into his ears, his body shuddered, and he came to an abrupt halt in midair. When he turned his head around, he stared at the incoming long spear in a daze, then at Su Ming, whose long hair danced in the air in the distance. The black-robed Su Ming caused a dazed expression to appear on Zhu Yukai's face at that moment. He seemed to see a middle-aged man with grief, mixed feelings of gratitude and resentment towards his master, and grief and guilt towards his lover. In the barren lands of divine essence, he was himself who had his soul scattered in the air. So it's him. seeking recommendation tickets. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1106. Zhu Yukai stared at the long spear that sounded like a woman's cries reverberating in all directions. With an incredible speed, it sliced through the air and closed in on him. In the blink of an eye, it arrived in front of him. Zhu Yukai was silent. His body stopped in midair. At the instant the spear closed in on him, he lifted his right hand and formed a seal. That seal appeared on his hand in a very jerky manner, but gave off an incredibly familiar feeling. These two feelings that should not have appeared at the same time intersected with each other on Zhu Yukai's lifted right hand. At the instant it disappeared, the shrill whistle from the life-death spear came to an abrupt halt. It appeared in Zhu Yukai's hand. Once he lifted his right hand and seized it, he flung it in front of him. Immediately, whistling sounds rose again, stirring up the sound of air being sliced. The shrill whistle became even stronger and reverberated in the air. This scene caused the approaching supreme treasure to come to an abrupt halt in midair. Disbelief appeared on its face. By Su Ming's side, Flame Fiend's progenitor also widened his eyes. He had known Zhu Yukai for thousands of years, but this was the first time he saw such a presence from him. That aura came from a moment Zhu Yukai held the reincarnation spear in his hand. A will that looked down upon the entire world erupted from his body. It was as if Zhu Yukai had become a completely different person at that moment. A person who could ignore his ugly body and his gigantic fleshly body. All that could be seen was the shocking sharpness of the spear as he held it in his hand. It was especially so for Su Ming. As he stared at Zhu Yukai, the shock in his heart could not be described with words. He clearly remembered the seal Zhu Yukai had formed just now. It was this seal that had snatched the long spear out of thin air. In fact, the spear had not even put up a single bit of resistance. In fact, Su Ming had even seen the spear trembling when Zhu Yukai held it. It was not trembling in fear, but in delight. Su Ming did not know whether this delight was just a figment of his imagination, but he felt as if he had finally reunited with the spear after a long time. As a myriad of thoughts raced through Su Ming's head, Zhu Yukai lowered his head and stared at the long spear in his hand quietly. A complicated and anguished look appeared in his eyes. After a long while, he averted his gaze and lifted his head to look at Su Ming. "This is yours." Su Ming stared at Zhu Yukai and nodded slowly. Only at this moment did he realize that this Zhu Yukai, who was originally the weakest among the old ghosts, clearly had his own secrets. He definitely did not possess the level of cultivation that he showed off to others. Su Ming remembered the half of the skeleton when he discovered the purplish-black long spear, and the fire spirit had mentioned that the skeleton's soul was still around. This spear's name is Rebirth. That's what it used to be called. It has another name. It's also called Life in Vein. However, this vein, not rebirth. Do you understand? Su Ming frowned. He did not speak, but Xian Shang, who was in the body of the supreme treasure, was momentarily stunned. If he read Zhu Yukai's words in the form of words, he would understand them at first glance, but if he listened to them, he did not understand Zhu Yukai's words. He was not the only one. The others were also at a loss. Only progenitor Long Hai looked as if he was deep in thought. The eyes of Flame Fiend's progenitor focused, and he sank into deep thought. If you don't understand, then it's fine if you don't want this spear. Zhu Yukai sighed softly and lowered his head to look at the spear in his hand again. A hint of grief and guilt appeared in his eyes. At the instant Su Ming saw the grief and guilt in Zhu Yukai's eyes, a thought suddenly appeared in his mind. He remembered the first time he held the spear and the scenes that had appeared in his head. You held your partner's corpse in your arms, and you mourned for your own failure to become a ruler. So what if you reached the great realm of life? You just lived in vain, Su Ming said calmly. The instant his words fell into Zhu Yukai's ears, he lifted his head swiftly and looked at Su Ming. After a long while, he suddenly let out a long string of laughter. At that moment, as he laughed, The presence spreading out from his body formed a strong contrast against his ugly and plump body. As he laughed, he hid the grief that no one else could see. Zhu Yukai lifted his right hand and swung his arm. Immediately, the life inequity spear turned into a purplish-black light that charged toward Su Ming. It instantly appeared in front of him and floated there without moving, but there was a buzzing sound spreading out. When he heard it, Su Ming seemed to have understood something. "This spear is yours." Zhu Yukai laughed loudly. When he turned around, he took a step forward and did not even cast a glance at the three-headed statue that had appeared in the vortex at the bottom of the sea. It was as if even if it was a supreme treasure, it could not enter his eyes. He left into the distance. "Do not touch the statue of the sea god until you have perfected Fate Realm. If you do, you will bring about a great disaster. Take care." Zhu Yukai walked into the distance and stepped into the exit of the dimension. Then, he fused into the distortions in space and disappeared without a trace. Su Ming watched Zhu Yukai leave into the distance. When he disappeared, understanding appeared on his face. He lifted his right hand and seized the long spear floating in front of him. He looked at it and swung his right arm. The life inequity spear immediately disappeared and turned into a ring on Su Ming's thumb. "Why aren't you coming over?" Su Ming lifted his head and looked at the body of the supreme treasure, which was hesitating at that moment. The body of the supreme treasure was being controlled by Xian Shang at that moment, and he was incredibly conflicted. He had finally become the main soul after much difficulty, but if Su Ming fused with him again, then he would immediately become a subsidiary. This caused him to be unable to help but hesitate. "You don't want me to fuse with you?" When Su Ming asked flatly, he immediately sent his divine thought outwards. At the instant he did so, the body of the supreme treasure suddenly shone with a powerful light. As it shone, several overlapping shadows appeared on the body. The first to appear was naturally Su Hui. Su Hui tugged at a lock of her hair. When she took a step forward, she walked out of the body of the supreme treasure. With a single move, she appeared beside Su Ming. A smile appeared on her face as she stared at him. "I still like this version of you," Su Hui said with a light chuckle and a wink. Then, a second overlapping shadow appeared on the body of the supreme treasure. It was the unconscious bald crane. It was still unconscious, but once it was separated from the body of the supreme treasure by Su Ming, it charged towards Su Ming. Su Ming swung his arm and put it away into his storage bag. The third to appear was Progenitor Long Hai, who was also a nascent divinity like Flame Fiend's progenitor. In a flash, he immediately left the body of the supreme treasure. When he appeared beside Su Ming, he looked at Flame Fiend's progenitor. Long Hai. The expression of Flame Fiend's progenitor changed swiftly, and he instinctively took a few steps back. Naturally, he knew Long Hai. Forget about how the two of them knew each other in the past. Just the fact that Flame Fiend's progenitor had been tempted to devour Long Hai's physical body when they were at the 1,000 feet tall sapling had made him want to devour it. "Fellow Taoist Wakue, it's been a long time." Long Hai stared at Flame Fiend's progenitor with the ghost of a smile on his lips. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Both of them were nascent divinities, but it was precisely because of this that they could easily devour each other. Once Su Hui, the bald crane, and progenitor Long Hai left, the presence of the body of the supreme treasure swiftly diminished. At that moment, the combat power it showed was only equivalent to those in Solar Culpa Realm. Even if Xian Shang, Huayu, Yinyu, Ninyu, and Huayu still had some tricks up their sleeves that they had not executed, but at most they could only fight against those who had attained great completion in Solar Culpa Realm. Perhaps this sort of level of cultivation could allow them to do as they pleased in the world beyond, but in the fifth kiln, this sort of level of cultivation could not be said to be able to move an inch. As for Su Ming, he could fight against a normal cultivator in Mastery Realm on his own. He also had Progenitor Long Hai, who could even borrow Flame Fiend's progenitor strength. Besides, he also had 2 chances to attack from Sand Earthling's progenitor. In fact, he also had the god ascension nectar and the three-leaf grass that could allow people to control the laws of fate. With all of these in hand, his strength was no different from before, and he did not care about what Huang Mei and Zilong would think once they noticed it. He did not even spare a glance at the body of the supreme treasure, whose expression had changed drastically at that moment. Su Ming turned around and walked towards the exit of the dimension. The people beside him immediately followed. When they turned into long arcs and left into the distance, Su Ming did not bother himself with the three-headed statue in the vortex at the bottom of the sea. His instincts told him that he chose to believe in Zhu Yukai. Besides, the entire fifth kiln would definitely be his in the future. Unless he ran into some sort of treasure that he was incredibly desperate for, he would not be in a hurry to obtain it. This was something that made Su Ming different from the others. When Xian Shang and the other three saw Su Ming leaving into the distance, their faces instantly turned pale with panic. Xian Shang was one of them. At that moment, he came to a swift realization. Su Ming did indeed need the body of the supreme treasure, but to the four of them, their need for Su Ming was even greater. If it had been anyone else, they would have attacked a long time ago and killed the four of them to snatch it. However, this was also because Su Ming did not think that there was a need for him to do so. If he truly believed that he had to obtain this supreme treasure, then even if this supreme treasure was created by the sublime paragon from true Sacredine world, and this sublime paragon was the master of the life and equity spear's owner, the red-robed teenager Su Ming saw in the picture, what could he do? Senior, please wait. Xian Shang's heart was immediately filled with the other three's anxious complaints. At that moment, he quickly caught up to Su Ming. I know my wrongs. Senior, please forgive me. Senior, please give me another chance. I will definitely not harbor any other thoughts. I swear on the soul of Xian family's progenitor in heaven. This was how smart Xian Shang was. He did not try to defend himself or hide his hesitation just now. Instead, he said it directly and lowered his stance to admit his wrongs. By doing so, he could avoid causing Su Ming to be displeased again because he tried to defend himself and hide his wrongs. As he chased after Su Ming, Xian Shang immediately spread out his soul, causing the body of the supreme treasure to instantly lose control of the main soul. Once it was free, Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt, and he turned his head around to look at the body of the supreme treasure that had lost its main soul. I will only do this once. There will not be a next time. As he spoke, Su Ming moved. With a swing of his arm, he swept up Flame Fiend's progenitor, who had come to understand what was going on a long time ago and was smiling wryly at that moment. Then, along with the group, he charged towards the body of the supreme treasure. Once he fused with it, Su Ming became the main soul, and among the supporting souls was Flame Fiend's progenitor. This was also the reason why Su Ming did not kill Flame Fiend's progenitor. In truth, he had another plan, but he had given up on it, and that was to have Flame Fiend's progenitor possess the white-robed teenager's body to cause a misunderstanding between Huang Mei and Zilong, and from there, they would shift their attention to Flame Fiend's progenitor. However, once he thought about it carefully, he still gave up on this plan. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1107. When he stepped out of the dimension, it was just as Su Ming had expected. He appeared on the spirit trudging platforms at the edge of the second layer. The previous 6 spirit trudging platforms had now been reduced to 5. The white-robed teenager's death and the 5 spirit trudging platforms floating in space exuded a brutal air at that moment. Su Ming controlled the body of the supreme treasure. Once he walked out calmly, he sat down cross-legged. 3 of the 5 platforms were empty. Zhu Yukai was the only one who had arrived before Su Ming. He sat there quietly with his eyes closed and did not move. Su Ming swept his gaze across the area and frowned slightly. Huang Mei and Reverend Zilong had not arrived yet. Starting from the edge of the second layer, it becomes even more brutal. Due to the appearance of dimensions with supreme treasures, the deeper we go, the less space there is. That's why it's normal for multiple people to appear in one dimension. Because of that, the competition will become even more intense. Su Ming fell into deep thought. His goal was not the supreme treasure, but the core of the fifth kiln. He wanted to go there and see whether Su Xian was there. If he was, then everything would become clear, but if he was not, Su Ming wanted to know whether his other guess was correct. In fact, when he thought of it, his heart clenched in pain, because his second guess was that there was a corpse at the core of the fifth kiln. It was a woman who had once held onto her child before she died, and even in death, she still wanted to protect her child. It was a mother who was unfamiliar to Su Ming, but also vaguely familiar to him. In truth, in the depths of Su Ming's heart, his memories of his mother far surpassed his father's. After all, the scene he saw in the illusion of his memories in Western Ring Nebula's foreign land had shocked his soul, causing him to be unable to forget even a single part of it. In silence, Su Ming waited quietly for Huang, Mei, and Reverend Zilong to arrive. Time trickled by. About 2 days passed by, and suddenly, 2 of the remaining 3 spirit trudging platforms started shining brightly at the same time. That light attracted Su Ming's attention. He saw 2 figures appearing on the 2 spirit trudging platforms at almost the same time. The 2 figures swiftly gained corporeal form, and several breaths later, when the light faded away, they revealed themselves to be Huang, Mei, and Zilong. The yellow-browed man coughed out a mouthful of blood when he appeared. He staggered a few steps back and almost fell off the spirit-treading platform. As for Zilong, his face was pale, but the killing intent in his eyes was incredibly thick. When he appeared, he took a few steps back and forced himself to stop. He lifted his head and glared at the yellow-browed man. When Su Ming saw this, he immediately came to an understanding. Clearly, the 2 of them had been fighting over some sort of treasure in the same dimension, but he did not know who would end up with that treasure. However, when Su Ming saw Reverend Zilong's expression, he had an answer in his heart. Despicable, Zilong said slowly, his voice full of coldness. So what if I'm despicable? The yellow-browed man wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and laughed. His laughter was very hearty, as if it was a matter of course. As long as this treasure is in my hands, it doesn't matter even if I'm injured by you. As he spoke, the yellow-browed man lifted his right hand, and a jade bracelet appeared on his palm. It was an emerald-green jade bracelet. There were countless runic symbols rising and falling on its surface. They were circling around the jade bracelet, causing it to shine with a brilliant light. There was also a powerful, mighty pressure spreading out from the bracelet, causing all those who saw it to be unable to help their pupils shrink. Once Zilong saw the jade bracelet, his expression turned even darker. He stared at the yellow-browed man coldly, but he did not speak again. Instead, he sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and breathed. The yellow-browed man smiled and put away the bracelet. He swept his gaze across the area and completely ignored Zhu Yukai. When he looked at Su Ming, a friendly expression appeared on his face, and he nodded with a smile. He did not even ask about Flame Fiend's progenitor. He's looking for an ally. Su Ming knew full well that if the yellow-browed man had not been injured, then he would definitely not have let go of the fact that Flame Fiend's progenitor was not by his side so easily. However, he was injured, so he avoided this matter and expressed his goodwill to Su Ming, intending to work together with him. As for Zhu Yukai, it was clear that he had also been ignored by the yellow-browed man. Su Ming cast a glance at Zhu Yukai and found that he had opened his eyes at some unknown point in time and was staring at space with a dazed expression. With his appearance and the level of cultivation he revealed, it was no wonder that no one would pay any attention to him. However, Su Ming, who had personally witnessed what had happened in the previous dimension, would definitely not underestimate Zhu Yukai. If my guess is correct, then the most terrifying among these people isn't Huang, Mei, or Zilong, but Zhu Yukai, Su Ming thought in his heart. In truth, among the 3 of them, Zhu Yukai's attitude was vague, but Su Ming was 8/10 certain that his guess was correct. This person was definitely connected to the owner of the Life Inequity Spear, Chong He, but he did not know how close that connection was. As for Zilong and Huang Mei, Su Ming was more inclined towards Zilong. As for the yellow-browed man, he might seem like a straightforward person, but Su Ming could sense an indistinct, sinister air about him. As Su Ming was immersed in his thoughts, Reverend Zilong opened his eyes and stood up. Once he swept his gaze across the area, he lifted his right foot and stepped on the spirit trudging stone. With a bang, his voice instantly spread in all directions. As it did so, the yellow-browed man's expression suddenly changed. Everyone's here. Why waste time here? Let's go to the dimension between the second and first layer. When Zilong spoke faintly, the space in front of him immediately distorted, and a gigantic vortex appeared. That vortex was the dimension that led to the second and first layers. Almost at the same time, the loud bang from the spirit trudging platform under Zilong's feet reverberated in the air. The roars of fire spirits came from all directions. Clearly, the loud bang had attracted their attention, and they were swiftly rushing over. The roars drifted about. There were only two explanations for this sort of sound in the empty space. One of them was that there were very few fire spirits, which was why they were roaring. The other possibility was that there were so many of them that their roars echoed in the air, which was why this sort of sound had appeared. Just now, you said that I was despicable. Right now, fellow Taoist Zilong, your actions are the same as shortening the time we need to adjust our breathing. If you were just targeting me, then you could have just said something. Why did you have to make things difficult for this fellow Taoist and fellow Taoist Jew? You must know that the space between the second and first layers is incredibly dangerous. Every single breath we have to rest is incredibly precious, the yellow-browed man said in a ghastly manner with a cold harumph. Zilong looked over coldly. Stop spouting nonsense. If you want to stay, then stay. The one who doesn't have time to adjust his breathing isn't these two fellow Taoists, it's you. A fierce glare shone in Reverend Zilong's eyes. He turned around and took a step towards the vortex that had appeared beside his spirit trudging platform. A barely noticeable glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He was not averse to Zilong's actions. If he was in Zilong's shoes, he would definitely do the same. Between Zilong and Huang Mei, Zilong's injuries were slightly lighter, which was why he only needed to adjust his breathing slightly to recover most of his injuries. As for Huang Mei, what was most important to him right then was time. He needed enough time to recover. Zilong's actions of walking out of the spirit trudging platform ahead of time and stirring up booming sounds immediately shortened the amount of time Huang Mei needed. This was an overt scheme, but it was a straightforward one. Once Zilong left, Zhu Kai also stood up slowly. With one step, the spirit trudging platform on which he stood immediately let out booming sounds. Once a vortex appeared beside him, he did not even look at Huang Mei. With one step, he walked towards the vortex and disappeared without a trace. The roars of the fire spirits in the area grew stronger with each passing moment. They closed in swiftly, and the air around them started tumbling about rapidly, exuding a presence that wanted to devour the world. Su Ming looked towards Huang Mei, who had a dark expression on his face, and an apologetic expression appeared on his face. He wrapped his fist in his palm towards Huang Mei and opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he only let out a sigh. Huang Mei frowned, but he still nodded towards Su Ming. After all, among the four of them, he had already offended Zilong. As for Zhu Kai, he had completely ignored him. If Su Ming did not show any goodwill, he would have let it slide. He would have been thinking about how he could kill Su Ming to prevent him from working together with Zilong. However, when he saw Su Ming's expression, he immediately quelled all other thoughts. The thought of drawing Su Ming to his side and forming an alliance with him occupied most of his thoughts. Once he bowed towards Huang Mei, Su Ming lifted his foot and stepped on the platform. When booming sounds rang out, a vortex appeared beside his spirit trudging platform. Su Ming cast an apologetic glance at Huang Mei again before he walked into the vortex and disappeared. After stepping into the vortex, the apologetic look on his face instantly disappeared and was replaced by indifference. Since everyone was scheming against each other, then Su Ming would naturally not face them head-on. His apology just now was completely fake. His goal was to have Huang Mei draw him to his side. Because of it, his existence would be incredibly important to Zilong and Huang Mei. Besides, Su Ming knew Zhu Yukai's background, and he had also witnessed the scene in the dimension just now. At the very least, he was much better off than Huang Mei and Zilong. If that was the case, then he, Su Ming, would be in an invincible position. With Su Ming's intelligence, he would be able to stand on equal footing with those cunning and astute people if he fought against them. How would he be able to gain the most benefits from these powerful warriors? I'm already very close to the core of the fifth kiln. Su Ming sensed his life force flowing out of his body while he stood in the vortex. He stared at the chaos in the vortex quietly, and determination as well as desire rose in his heart. He wanted to use his fastest speed to head to the core of the fifth kiln and see whether his mother from the illusion in the past was there. This was an uneasy, complicated, and expectant feeling, and it caused Su Ming's heart to be unable to calm down. With these thoughts in mind, Su Ming walked out of the vortex and stepped into a new dimension. Immediately, all his thoughts were forcefully chased away by the scene in the dimension, and a fierce look instantly appeared in his eyes. He saw Zilong and Zhu Yukai in the dimension. The two of them were the same as Su Ming at that moment. They were staring at the ground in the dimension, and their expressions changed to become solemn that had never been seen before. On the ground, there was a towering mountain that pierced through the clouds. The color of the mountain was blue, and endless blue light covered the mountain. At the top of the mountain, there was a stone platform that was several meters wide, and on the stone platform, there was an iron book. There's an art recorded in this book. This art's name is Mountain Shifter. An ancient voice spread through the entire world from the top of the mountain. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1108. At the instant the voice reverberated in the world, Su Ming's pupil shrank. He saw a figure that seemed to have forced its way into his line of sight from the side of the stone platform. That figure was originally not in Su Ming's line of sight, but it had appeared out of nowhere and turned into a white-haired old man. His face was ancient, and his body was an illusion, giving others a feeling that he was not real. Behind him was the sky. It was surrounded by blue skies and white clouds, causing the old man to be filled with elegance. There was also an endless air of mystery about him. The mountain was very tall to begin with, and because of that, as the clouds and fog surrounded the mountain, the old man's already mysterious air became even more veiled. The echoing voice had come from the old man's mouth. He lowered his head to look at the iron scroll on the stone platform, then lifted his right hand to stroke it gently. After a long while, when Zilong and Zhu Yukai remained silent and the area fell into relative silence, the old man's ancient voice reverberated in the air once again. "You're very lucky." The old man's voice was low. As he spoke, the clouds and fog around him tumbled about and swam about, as if time had instantly flowed by thousands of times in the space around him. Su Ming did not think much of it, but Reverend Zilong's expression changed swiftly, as if he had seen some clues. He instinctively took a few steps back, and a zealous look that had never appeared before appeared in his originally cold eyes. Zhu Yukai's pupils shrank violently as well. He stared at the time swimming about in the space around the old man, and his breathing quickened in a barely noticeable manner. He could naturally see more than Zilong, and it was precisely because of this that the changes in his emotions were so great that it was difficult for anyone else to understand them. A thought appeared in Su Ming's heart, but he did not speak. He continued listening to the old man's voice reach his ears in silence. In all the times the fifth kiln has been activated, no one has stepped into the dimension where I am. You are the first batch. The old man turned his head around, and his gaze landed on the ground before he swept his gaze past Su Ming and the other two. The fifth kiln is the supreme treasure of the Abyss Builders from the fifth true world. I am acquainted with the progenitor of Abyss Builders, and I once used his kiln to refine treasures, but I had to pay a certain price for it. I branded the first style of my 7 ultimate arts, Mountain Shifter, here, and it will belong to the fated one. I have already left arid Triad Expanse Cosmos and headed to the war between camps. Right now, the one who is here is a projection of me. If my real body is still alive and the one who learns this Mountain Shifter art, then if fate allows it, we will meet again in the future. If my real body is already dead, then this Mountain Shifter art will be the ultimate technique. The white-haired old man spoke flatly. As his words echoed in the air, the feeling of time flowing around him became even stronger. His words caused the light in Reverend Zilong's eyes to become even brighter. This attracted a great deal of attention from Su-ming. He could clearly see that Reverend Zilong's expression had not been like this previously, but when he saw time flowing in the air around the old man, his expression had changed. It was as if he had originally not paid too much attention to it, but in an instant, his desire for it had risen. All of these changes were caused by the flowing of time around the old man. Could it be that once someone reaches a certain realm, they will naturally change the air around them, and from there, they will be able to form a mighty pressure? Or could it be that this is a change that appeared after someone practices some sort of divine ability, and through it, they can learn the old man's identity? A glint appeared in Su-ming's eyes, and all sorts of guesses rose in his head. Mountain Shifter is the first style of my ultimate art, but even the first style can still kill all those in Mastery Realm and shake the laws of fate. Once they understand it, they will be able to stir up the mountains in all the expanse cosmoses in the universe, and they will all appear where they want to go. This is Mountain Shifter. The one who understands this art will have my projection dissipate, and the dimension I've opened up on my own in this expanse cosmos will crumble. At that time, I will use the destructive power of this expanse cosmos to send the fated person who understands this art to the edge of the first layer of the 5th kiln, giving that person the chance to step straight into the core region. If you give up, I can also instantly send you out of the 5th kiln. When the old man at the top of the mountain said those words flatly, the space behind Su-ming and the others suddenly distorted. Huang Mei moved and walked out. Once he walked out and saw the mountain and the old man on it, the yellow-browed man's expression changed. He stared at the flow of time in the air around the old man, and his breathing quickened. The moment he appeared, the old man at the top of the mountain lifted his right hand and pointed at the yellow-browed man. With it, Su-ming instantly felt as if the sky was about to crumble and the earth was about to shatter. It was as if the entire universe had been replaced by that one finger. This feeling was an indescribable pressure, a vast pressure that was difficult to resist. It was also at that moment that Su-ming found it impossible to determine the old man's level of cultivation. After all, this was just a projection, but it was already much stronger than all the powerful warriors Su-ming had seen before. If there was truly someone who could fight against him, then perhaps it would only be the sublime paragon of true Sacredine world, who Su-ming had seen through the life inequity spear. Is he in Death Realm, or is he a sublime paragon? When Su-ming's heart trembled, he immediately saw signs of time flowing around Huang Mei as the old man pointed at him. Huang Mei's expression changed again. When his body shuddered, the flowing of time around him disappeared, but excitement appeared in his eyes. At that moment, Su-ming was not the only one who understood. Zilong and Zhu Yukai also saw through the clues. Huang Mei was someone who had come later. He originally did not know what the old man had said, but since he had come to this dimension, the old man had changed some of the flow of time around him so that his existence would be synchronized with the others. He might have seemed to have come later, but in truth, as the flow of time changed, Huang Mei had stepped into this place at the same time as Su-ming and the others, so it was only natural that he knew what the old man had said. All of this was incredibly abstruse and seemed rather difficult to understand, but if anyone thought about it carefully, they would understand. However, as they understood it, they could not help but feel great respect towards the old man. The power to change time was so great that Zilong and Huang Mei's hearts trembled. Zhu Yukai's eyes sparkled. No one knew what he had thought of, but compared to the three of them, Su Ming was the most shocked, because others might not know much about the power to change time, but there was no way Su Ming would not know about it, because this was one of the Abyss Builder's inborn abilities. The 12 of you are all fated together. No matter what method you use, be it enchanted treasures, cultivation bases, or physical bodies, there is only one way for you to obtain this art, and that is to see who is the first to arrive in front of me and place their hands on the iron scroll on the stone platform. I have left my brand on the iron scroll. The first person who touches it will definitely understand it and learn it. The old man swung his arm, and the world immediately roared. The entire sky turned into a huge vortex. As loud booming sounds reverberated in the air, the ground trembled. Immediately, more of the mountain that was already tall to begin with crawled out of the ground. It shot straight into the clouds, and its top could not be seen with the naked eye. Begin the inheritance. At the instant the old man's voice traveled out from the top of the mountain, Zilong's body swayed. He might be uncertain about the old man's words regarding the 12 people, but this was not the time for him to be thinking about it. He turned into a long arc that charged to the top of the mountain. Killing intent shone in Huang Mei's eyes, and he rushed out without any hesitation. Zhu Yukai frowned. He did not even look at Zilong and Huang Mei, who had rushed out. Instead, he stared at the mountain and took a few steps forward with a pensive look on his face. Almost at the instant Reverend Zilong and Huang Mei turned into long arcs and were about to rush to the top of the mountain, their expressions changed drastically. The first to do so was Huang Mei. He shuddered and fell to the ground. With a bang, he landed on the ground. As his body trembled, he lifted his head to look at the mountain, and fear appeared on his face. At the instant he flew up, he immediately felt his cultivation base disappear. He had never experienced this sort of feeling before. It was as if he had been reduced from an immortal to a mortal. At that moment, the weakness in his entire body caused fear to rise in him, and it was unfamiliar to him. Soon after, it was Reverend Zilong's turn. He also charged to the ground. Once he landed with a bang, his expression was incredibly sour. As his eyes shone, deep wariness was hidden within them. He had also noticed the weakness in his body. It was a feeling he had not experienced for a long, long time. It was as if a small, ferocious beast could tear his entire body apart. He lifted his head to look at the towering mountain. Reverend Zilong gritted his teeth and walked forward with great difficulty. Compared to Zilong and Huang Mei, Zhu Yukai appeared to be in an even more relaxed state. He had not flown just now, but had instead walked forward. Even though it was still difficult for him, he was in a much better state compared to Zilong and Huang Mei. All of this fell into Su Ming's eyes. If he had not been able to see what was going on, he would not have been able to live until then, nor would he have been able to obtain such great power and enter the fifth kiln. There's a seal in this place. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes, but at that moment, he was not thinking about the seal in this place. Instead, he was thinking about the 12 people the old man had mentioned just now. Zilong, Huang Mei, Zhu Kai, Flame Fiend's progenitor, Progenitor Long Hai, Xin Shang, Huayu, Huayu, and Su Hui. There are only 10 of them. Even if I'm included, there are only 11 people. Where did these 12 people come from? Is he talking about the bald crane, or... In silence, Su Ming took a step towards the mountain, but right when his foot landed, his expression instantly changed. A feeling of weakness instantly surged through Su Ming's body. He was not surprised by the appearance of this feeling. After all, he had seen some clues about it previously, but what caused Su Ming's expression to change was that at the instant this feeling appeared, overlapping shadows quietly appeared on the body of the Supreme Treasure. This was a sign that the body of the Supreme Treasure was about to split. At the same time, Xin Shang, Huayu, and Huayu's cries of surprise traveled into Su Ming's mind. While their voices were still echoing in Su Ming's mind, the overlapping shadows on the body of the Supreme Treasure became stronger. In the end, with a bang, it crumbled. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1109. As the body of the supreme treasure was torn apart, progenitor Long High and Flame Fiend's progenitor were the first to be forced out. They turned into two long arcs that landed by the side, and their expressions were incredibly sour. Su Hui was next. She was also swept out of the body of the supreme treasure in an incredibly pathetic manner. Xian Shang and his group were the last to appear in the area, and Su Ming was also forced out of the body of the supreme treasure. At the same time, the body of the supreme treasure melted and turned into a red jade the size of a palm. It floated in midair and did not move. Xian Shang's face immediately turned pale. During that instant, he noticed that his connection with the body of the supreme treasure had disappeared. In other words, at that moment, for some unknown reason, the body of the supreme treasure had become an item without a master. If he could notice this, then the others in the area could naturally as well. At that moment, as Su Ming's body was torn apart, Zi Long and Huang Mei immediately turned their heads around. When they saw so many people appearing in an instant, their gazes focused. Zi Long did not speak. He turned his head around and continued walking towards the mountain. Huang Mei's expression changed. In the end, the ghost of a smile appeared on his face, along with a hint of derision and anger. So, you got a treasure from somewhere. You were only able to enter the fifth kiln after you put your pieces together. I've been deceived by you for a long time. I wonder which one of you is the main soul of this supreme treasure. Xian Shang and his group were panicking at that moment. This had happened too suddenly, causing them to be completely unprepared for it. When they heard Huang Mei's words, their hearts trembled. No one knew whether it was intentional or whether it was instinctive, but they immediately cast their gazes towards the calm Su Ming. As they looked over, Huang Mei's gaze immediately fell on Su Ming. He cast him a few scrutinizing glances, then let out a cold harumph. Derision flashed briefly in his eyes, but at the same time, a freezing glare appeared in them. He was an almighty, but he had been deceived by a group of puny cultivators. When he remembered how he had lost the bet and how he had been prepared to pay a price to draw them to his side, he felt that this was a form of humiliation. It would have been fine if you could have continued putting on an act, but you just had to have your body split apart here. Useless thing. Huang Mei laughed coldly. He turned around and no longer spared Su Ming a glance. With great difficulty, he walked towards the mountain. At this moment, Zhu Yukai was walking at the forefront, followed by Zi Long and Huang Mei. However, the three of them were extremely far away from the top of the mountain, and the same was true for each other because they were not walking the same path. Zhu Yukai was moving forward in a straight line, while Zi Long and Huang Mei had split up and taken another path after they fell from the sky. You heard the old man's words just now. Since the body of the supreme treasure has already been split apart, there is no need for it to fuse back together. Everything will depend on your own serendipity. When Su Ming spoke calmly, he turned his head around and cast a glance at Su Hui. Su Hui smiled at Su Ming, putting on an expression that said he did not need to worry. Su Ming nodded and no longer bothered himself with the crowd. He took a step forward. The others wanted the mountain shifter art, and Su Ming desired it as well. He had already noticed that as his level of cultivation increased, he lacked enchanted treasures. But what he lacked even more were divine abilities. It would be easier for him to deal with those whose levels of cultivation were lower than his. But if he had to deal with those who were at the same level of cultivation as him, or even those who were stronger than him, then Su Ming would not have many powerful divine abilities that he could bring out. The ones he had learned previously were either not powerful enough or were incredibly profound and could not be of any use within a short period of time. Right then, he was in a great hurry to obtain this art. It was just as the old man had said, the mountain shifter art that could shake even almighties. Aside from that, Su Ming calculated the number of people once more, and he found that there was still one person missing. Just who was the one missing? Where was he? Su Ming believed that he was not the only one who had guessed this. The others were definitely thinking about it as well. Since he could not understand it, Su Ming buried this matter at the bottom of his heart and lifted his head to look at the top of the mountain. He took a step forward, and as he continued moving forward, the mighty pressure from the mountain became stronger. This mighty pressure was not a power that could make a person break down, but one that could dissolve their cultivation bases and turn powerful warriors into mortals. It was clearly even more difficult for mortals to walk up this mountain. Time trickled by. The others behind Su Ming also chose to walk up the mountain. Xian Shang and the other three leaned against each other and walked with great difficulty. Su Hui was panting harshly, but she was also gritting her teeth and moving forward. Since Long Hai and Huoke were nascent divinities, it was much more convenient for them to move forward compared to the others. In fact, the mighty pressure from the mountain was much weaker against them. Because of it, the two of them were much faster than the others. Even though they were the last to take a step forward, they were already at the same level as Su Ming, and they were only several hundreds of feet away from Zhu Yukai. As time passed, everyone climbed up the mountain and continued climbing toward the top of the endless mountain. Hua Kuei and progenitor Long Hai had already surpassed Zhu Yukai and became the people closest to the top of the mountain among all the people. Their expressions were different, but both of them were filled with excitement. They continued climbing down, as if they could see the stone platform and iron scroll at the top of the mountain waiting for their arrival. Zilong's expression was dark, but he gritted his teeth and persevered. Zhu Yukai frowned, then shook his head in hesitation. He did not speak. As for Huang Mei, a cold sneer appeared at the corners of his lips. He did not believe that there would be such a flaw in this place that would allow the nascent divinities to have an even smoother journey. At that moment, for some unknown reason, the mountain shuddered. With it, the entire mountain looked as if it was swaying, and a powerful rebound spread out. Su Ming's body swayed. At that moment, he had a strong feeling that the mountain he was climbing was not a mountain, but a living, ferocious beast. As it swayed, he had a feeling that he was about to be flung off. As his expression changed, Su Ming gripped the mountain rock tightly. His fingers had already turned white, but his grip was incredibly firm. Even though his cultivation base had disappeared and he had become like a mortal, he was no stranger to climbing mountains. He had grown up in Dark Mountain Tribe, and before he practiced the ways of the berserkers, the mountain had been his playground, which was why his reaction was incredibly quick. Once he gripped the mountain rock, he stuck his body to the wall and simply allowed the mountain to sway, but he did not budge. If he could do this, then perhaps the others could do the same, but the expressions of Long Hai and Hua Kuei, who were right in front of him, changed drastically. They noticed that as the mountain swayed, their nascent divinities were rapidly withering away. This discovery made them immediately let go of the rock, and their bodies charged towards the ground. In an instant, they became the last. When a mountain no longer swayed, they continued climbing with some hesitation. However, this was just the first wave of swaying. After about the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the second wave of swaying arrived. This time, it was several times stronger than the previous wave. The mountain swayed, and muffled booming sounds reverberated in the air. All the people who were climbing the mountain instantly stopped. Their faces were livid with rage, and they gripped the mountain rock tightly. When the swaying lasted for several breaths before it disappeared, they continued climbing. If they continued like this, then this mountain would not be too difficult. However, when the group climbed to about 3/10 of the mountain's height, the ground beneath them suddenly changed. The ground disappeared in an instant, and booming sounds reverberated in the air, causing all the people to lower their heads to look at it. Their pupils shrank, and it was especially so for Xian Shang and his group. Their expressions changed drastically. There was no longer any ground beneath them, only a dark abyss. It was filled with the aura of death, and there was also a vortex spinning with loud, rumbling sounds. It looked incredibly terrifying. If they still had their cultivation bases, they would not be bothered by it, but now that their cultivation bases had disappeared, they were like mortals. Once they fell, as the group fell into deep thought, the third wave of swaying came. This time, the swaying was even stronger than before, and it did not last for just a few breaths. Instead, it lasted for nearly 20 breaths. Nianin was the one who was the most injured among Xianshang and the other three. The mountain rock he held in his hands immediately shattered, and he charged towards the vortex beneath him. His face was pale, and right when he let out a shrill scream of pain, his body sank into the dark vortex in the abyss beneath him. A few sounds of chewing and screams of pain came from within before they came to an abrupt stop. Su Ming was not the only one who saw this. Even Zilong and Huang Mei felt their skins crawl, and they stared at the abyss beneath them. There are 11 people left. An ancient voice slowly spread out from the distant summit. That voice might still be old, but when it landed in the group's ears, there was an endless aloofness to it. Senior, you said that no one has ever come here before. It's clear that we need a fortuitous encounter to come to this dimension. If we all die in the abyss, then who will come to learn your mountain shifter art? You will have to wait for another 10,000 years. Huang Mei immediately said, Did I say that? I must have remembered wrongly. Before all of you, there were others who came here, but none of them were fated. The old man's calm voice came from the summit. The yellow-browed man was rendered speechless for a long time upon hearing this. He was not the only one. The others also fell silent. The old man's words and the cultivator's deaths turned into a shadow that enveloped the mountain and everyone's hearts. In the midst of this silence, Zhu Yukai quietly lifted his hand and continued climbing. Zilong and Huang Mei also continued moving towards the summit in silence. This was their only goal. At that moment, Su Hui was also moving above Xianshang and the other two. She gritted her teeth and moved upwards bit by bit. The feeling of her cultivation base disappearing and turning into a mortal made her remember everything that had happened to her when she was young. Suddenly, the fourth wave of swaying descended with a bang with an intensity that far surpassed that of the previous ones. The mountain swayed as if it was about to collapse, and it was also at the instant Su Hui lifted her right hand, prepared to grab a mountain rock. However, the mountain's swaying caused her to grab air. As her body trembled, she was flung outwards and charged towards the vortex that had buried Nianin. Below her were Xianshang and the other two. If Xianshang extended his hand, he would have the chance to grab Su Hui, but he hesitated for a moment, and because of it, Su Hui's body had already closed in on the vortex. Su Hui's expression was calm. She looked at Su Ming on the summit, sighed softly, and closed her eyes. Requesting recommendation tickets to be continued. If you like this work, please come and give me recommendation votes or monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 11:10. Sui did not make a single sound. At the moment she closed her eyes, she watched Su Ming lift his hand to continue climbing, and she closed her eyes. She could have called for help, but she did not. The mountain was filled with danger, and no one had any power left. If she called for help, what would Su Ming do? If he ignored her, then her heart would ache. That pain would be mixed with bitterness, along with a deep sense of disappointment and sadness. However, if Su Ming chose to save her, then in her eyes, what awaited him would be death. She would rather let him choose to ignore this sort of death. That was why she did not call out for help. At the moment she closed her eyes, she shut her mouth tightly. Vaguely, Su Hui seemed to be able to see the world around her, the lone boat swaying, the thin moon dimming, and the petals falling from the sky. He left into the distance, leaving the background to her. In the wind, in the mountain, she watched his lonely figure gradually leave into the distance. Parting was always so sudden that people could not accept it in time, but they had to accept it. The flower of reincarnation on the stone of 3 lives was beautiful and sad. Who would cross it to reach the other side of the soul? The forlorn and drawn-out moans from the river of forgetfulness and the valley of love were cut off from then on. At the instant Su Hui's body fell and she closed her eyes, Su Ming's heart trembled for some unknown reason. He did not notice her falling because the mountain swayed, causing him to be unable to think about anything else. However, what caused his heart to tremble was the sigh Zhu Yukai let out when he turned his head around to look down from above. That sigh seemed to have fused together with the sigh from below. At that moment, it stirred Su Ming's soul, causing his heart to tremble. He lowered his head swiftly, and he saw her eyes were closed and her mouth was shut. Like a kite with its string snapped, she fell into the abyss. If Su Ming still had his cultivation base, he would use it to save Su Hui. Even if he no longer had his cultivation base, if he still had his inborn ability, then he could change the flow of time so that Su Hui would not fall. But he did not have his cultivation base, and neither did he have his inborn ability. At that moment, Su Ming was like a mortal. That was why Su Ming let go. What he released was not the hand that was holding on to Su Hui, but his hands that were holding onto the mountain rock. The instant his hands relaxed, his body abruptly plummeted down into the abyss. It was just like all those years ago when he was in the land of berserkers. Yu Xian's unconscious body had left into the distance, and when he wanted to catch her, her body had dissipated with a poignant but beautiful smile. Only a lock of her hair remained. One to the left, one to the right, one to the front, one to the back. In the end, he did not manage to grab onto any of them. All he managed to grab onto was the boundless pain in the depths of his heart. Therefore, he didn't think or hesitate this time. There were some things that, once he thought about it, he might not have the courage to do it. Once he hesitated, he might regret it for the rest of his life. Sometimes it was better to follow one's instincts and walk a path without regrets. You could close your eyes, shut your mouth, and not cry for help in order not to disturb me. You were willing to fall into the 9 hells and bid farewell to me. You didn't even want me to notice your sigh. Then I can also let go of the hand that is climbing into the sky for you. If I can't catch you then, I will fall into the 9 hells with you. Su Ming fell. The sudden release of his grip stunned the others. When they lowered their heads, they saw Su Hui's afterimage being devoured by the vortex in the abyss. Su Ming stared at her falling figure. He was getting closer and closer to her. To make himself fall even faster, he used his agility to step on a protruding mountain rock and used the momentum to push himself down. As the mountain swayed, Su Ming once again used the power of the swaying mountain to push his body forward. At the speed of his descent, he instantly rushed into the canyons of the vortex. It was an abyss filled with fog. Muffled booms echoed in all directions. Su Ming saw Su Hui falling, and with a twist of his body, he stomped on the wall beside him, causing him to catch up to her with a loud whoosh. He caught up to her and hugged her. The two of them fell into the seemingly endless abyss at the same time from midair. At the instant Su Hui was hugged, a familiar presence and warmth came from beside her, causing her to open her eyes and look at Su Ming. Su Ming, too, looked at her. The wind moaned beside the two of them. As they fell, they stared at each other. There was a type of person who never spoke of love, but the love hidden in the depths of their hearts was a determination that could last for an entire lifetime if you understood it. There was a type of person who always had a smile on her face. Her mature charm made her look like a big sister, but do not be deceived by her gentleness. Hidden behind that gentleness was the other side of her personality, but no matter which side it was, she would choose to walk down the determination in her heart to the end. If I go to the sky, I will be by your side in a dignified manner. If I go to the 9 hells, I will be by your side as you sink into oblivion. You are white, and I am willing to turn myself white. You chose black, then I will be the same as you. I will become the night in the sky. You saved me again. This time, I saw your face clearly. A beautiful smile bloomed on Su Hui's face. Why didn't you call out to me? Su Ming asked softly. The one who couldn't catch the mountain rock was me, not you. Su Hui hugged Su Ming as well. Her hair danced in the air and wrapped around his face, covering his eyes. Su Hui hugged him tightly and buried her head on his shoulder. She closed her eyes, and while a smile appeared on her face, there was anguish that Su Ming could not see. At that moment, a low roar that was very close to them traveled forth. A huge head suddenly appeared in the indistinct fog around them. It was a black head covered in boils, and, from its appearance, Su Ming could vaguely tell that it was the cultivator Nian Yin who had fallen previously. However, his body was several times larger than before. Just his head alone was already 10 feet tall. He floated in the fog and was smiling ferociously at Su Ming and Su Hui. The fog rolled up, and Nian Yin's body, which was about 100-something feet tall, was completely revealed. Su Ming saw that his body was covered in boils, and quite a number of them had already burst. When yellow liquid was revealed, a thick stench spread through the area. With a low roar, Nian Yin charged toward Su Ming. He opened his mouth wide and dragged out a large amount of sticky liquid. He looked incredibly ferocious, and he looked as if he wanted to devour Su Ming and Su Hui in one go. Su Ming's heart trembled, but at that moment, he had lost all his cultivation base and could not fight back. When he saw that the ferocious beast that Nian Yin had turned into was closing in on him, a huge hand covered in boils suddenly stretched out of the fog and seized Nian Yin's body before yanking him backwards. Nian Yin's 100-something feet tall body tumbled backwards. Once he was flung away, an even thicker ferocious beast that was several hundreds of feet tall appeared in the fog. That beast had clearly been a cultivator in the past, but it was even bigger. There were countless boils all over its body, and veins popped up on its skin. As it roared, its eyes turned bloodshot, and it stared at Su Ming with madness and pain in them. "You are mine," he shouted indistinctly. When he rushed toward Su Ming immediately saw a dozen-something ferocious beasts formed by cultivators appearing in the fog at the same time. Clearly, these people were people who had come to the mountain in the past, but had fallen into the canyon. For some unknown reason, they had turned into this sort of life form that was neither human nor ghost after they died. If Su Ming still had his cultivation base, he would not be bothered by these ferocious spirits formed by cultivators who might or might not have died. But at that moment, Su Ming was as weak as a mortal, and his physical power was the same. Forget about a dozen of them. He would not even be able to fight against one of them. The ferocious spirit formed by the cultivator who had shouted just now roared and rushed toward Su Ming. The dozen-something ferocious spirits beside him, along with Nian Yin, who had been flung away, also roared and charged toward Su Ming. Su Ming sighed in his heart and looked at Su Hui. Su Hui also looked at him and closed her eyes. However, in the instant that she closed her eyes, a low roar suddenly came from above the abyss. "Capture him!" As those words traveled into the air, a huge chain shot through the canyon and charged toward Su Ming. In an instant, it closed in on him, and Su Ming lifted his right hand to grab it. At the instant he did so, a huge force traveled upwards and pulled Su Ming and Su Hui's bodies upwards. The roars became even stronger. The dozen-something ferocious spirits in the area roared and chased after them. If they had entered the city in the normal way, then with the chain pulling them upwards, there would have been a possibility that Su Ming and Su Hui could have rushed out of the canyon. However, at the instant the chain increased in speed, it suddenly froze. "Huang Mei, what is the meaning of this?" An enraged voice came from above again. It was the same voice as before, but this time it was even clearer. It was Zhu Yukai's voice. Due to the chain coming to a halt, the ferocious spirits closed in as they roared. When they were about to pounce on her, Su Hui opened her eyes and cast a deep glance at Su Ming. Then she pushed him away so that her body would leave his embrace, so that she would die in the ferocious beast's mouths, so that Su Ming could use the chain to leave. This was her choice. Su Ming's heart trembled. When he saw that Su Hui's body was about to leave, he grabbed the chain with his left hand and moved. He lifted his right hand to grab Su Hui's shoulder, and without any hesitation, he pulled her back. Then, he quickly tied a knot with the chain in his left hand. "Go up and wait for me. This is my 5th kiln. I won't die." Once Su Ming finished speaking, he pushed Su Hui upwards with all his strength, right in the midst of the anxiety on her face. After making some modifications. It's fine now. I'm sorry, but there is indeed something off about it. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 11:11. Pull the chain. Su Ming let out a loud roar. At the same time he pushed Su Hui up, he let go of his grip on the chain, and his body fell down once again. In an instant, the ferocious spirits rushed towards Su Ming and submerged him in the canyon. The chain was swiftly pulled, and Su Hui simply allowed it to swiftly bring her up. There were no tears in her eyes, but there was a dazed look on her face, as if she had lost her soul. The iron chain whistled through the air. Now that the evil spirits were no longer in pursuit, it pierced through the layers of mist vortexes. When it emerged from the depths of the abyss, Su Hui saw the sky, the mountain, and the other end of the chain in Zhu Yukai's hand. She also saw Huang Mei's dark expression and a trickle of blood at the corners of his mouth. A short black blade had appeared in his hand. That blade should have been on his person and not in his storage bag, or else it would have been impossible for him to have brought it out. The chain was released, and Su Hui gripped the mountain rock. She lowered her head quietly and looked down. Zhu Yukai sighed, but he did not finish speaking. He won't die. After some time, Su Hui spoke softly, as if she was talking to Zhu Yukai, but most of the time, she was mumbling to herself. A barely noticeable glint appeared in progenitor Long Hai's eyes. He could have attacked just now, but he did not. After all, while Su Ming's deed of saving his life was great, the oath he made in the beginning was also not small. If Su Ming died just like that, it would be a good thing for Long Hai. Flame Fiend's progenitor was also delighted in Su Ming's misfortune. A cold sneer appeared at the corners of his lips. Xian Shang and the other two also let out sighs of relief in their hearts. The mighty pressure Su Ming exerted on them had become so strong that it could control their thoughts without them realizing it. He won't die. The canyon in the mountain is filled with a sinister aura, along with a thick aura of death. Forget him. Even if I fell down, I would definitely die, Huang Mei said flatly with a cold sneer on his lips. The others might not have said anything, but they all agreed with Huang Mei's words. However, Nian Yin's fall and Su Ming's fall had caused their fear towards the mountain to grow even greater. They did not know who would be the next to fall. Su Hui did not speak. She stared at the canyon beneath her quietly, and the words Su Ming had said to her when he let go of her remained in her mind. She had already made up her mind. If Su Ming still did not come out, then she would fall into the canyon. Even if she turned into a ferocious spirit, she would stay with Su Ming. Therefore, Su Hui did not respond to the other's words at all. However, very soon, the yellow-browed man's expression changed. He raised his head and stared at the top of the mountain in the distance. He was not the only one. Reverend Zi Long also frowned. After he looked at the top of the mountain, he seemed to be deep in thought. Zhu Yukai should be the first to notice this strange thing. He glanced at Su Hui and recalled Su Hui's firm words. Gradually, progenitor Long Hai and Hua Kuei's expressions changed. In the end, when Xian Shang, Hua Yu, and Hua Yu registered what was going on, their expressions immediately turned sour. Because when Yanyin fell into the abyss, the old man on the mountaintop had said that there were only 11 people left. Logically speaking, he should have said that there were only 10 people left. However, he did not say anything, and the meaning behind it made the people hesitate. Time trickled by, but the old man at the top of the mountain still did not speak. They continued climbing the mountain, and the swaying of the mountain would occasionally become even more intense. In the canyon under the mountain, Su Ming had his eyes closed. His memories stopped at the moment he fell down and was surrounded by a group of ferocious spirits. In the midst of intense pain, he lost consciousness. Before he fainted, he could sense that his body was being torn and bitten. He did not know how much time had passed, but when he opened his eyes, he was lying in muddy, dirty water. Occasionally, there would be ripples spreading out from the water, and a rotten stench filled the area. There is a Tao in heaven and a gate in earth. You can step on the path of heaven, and you can see the path of earth from afar. An old voice echoed in all directions, causing Su Ming's mind to instantly become clear. When he struggled to stand up, he swiftly discovered that his cultivation base had recovered. But as it did so, Su Ming fell silent. He saw that his body was filled with countless boils. He lifted his hand and touched his face. He knew that he had become like the ferocious spirits he had seen previously. But soon, Su Ming no longer thought about his body, because the voice just now had given him a sense of familiarity. That familiarity was not too distant, and if he thought about it carefully, he would be able to find the answer. That voice was the voice of the old man at the top of the mountain he had heard when he was at the side of the mountain. Su Ming stood up, and a freezing glare shone in his eyes. If he was in the world outside, he would not have any advantage over the old man, but this was the fifth kiln, and he was an abyss builder. With a cold harumph, Su Ming swiftly flew up and flew towards the direction where the voice came from. Once he was in midair, he cast a glance in that direction and immediately saw a stone platform in the distance. There was a black lotus on it, and there was an old man sitting cross-legged on it. There were a dozen something ferocious spirits prostrating themselves around the old man. Pain appeared on their faces, and as they worshipped him, the old man's words echoed in all directions. All of you have no path to the sky, but a door to the earth has been opened. My art is divided into two forms. One is to move mountains to fuse with the will of the universe, and this is gentleness. The other is to move mountains with the will to dominate the world, and this is valiance. Go, the door to the earth has been opened. All of you can search for my tyrant's mountain shifter art, the old man said flatly. He lifted his right hand and swung it forward. Immediately, fog tumbled about in the air behind him. The ground rumbled faintly, and Su Ming saw it with his own eyes in midair. The ground immediately turned murky, and it was completely filled with fog. A gigantic mountain appeared under the ground. It was an inverted mountain that stood upside down under the ground, causing all those who saw it to feel as if the ground was not earth, but was completely formed by fog. If they looked at it upside down, they would be able to see the mountain standing tall in the fog. Mirror. Su Ming's heart trembled. This was the first time he had experienced the theory regarding mirrors he had heard when he was in the land of berserkers. If the fog was compared to a mirror, then the mountain where Su Ming was previously was outside the mirror, and the inverted mountain under the fog was inside the mirror. Perhaps the two of them were opposites. The mountain outside was the mirror, and what Su Ming saw at that moment was the true mountain outside the mirror. He could not see through it, could not tell it apart. Or perhaps it could change endlessly with just one thought. Su Ming stared at the old man in midair and frowned. He stared at the mountain under the fog, and a pensive look appeared on his face. At the same time, the ferocious spirits prostrating themselves around the old man immediately stood up. As they roared, they rushed towards the inverted mountain under the fog. Their cultivation bases did not disappear. Instead, as they charged towards each other, the mountain trembled, and 10 circles of light immediately appeared around the ferocious spirits. The ferocious spirits closed in on the spots where the circles of light were, but there were more than a dozen of them, while there were only 10 circles of light. A battle for supremacy instantly broke out. In just a moment, all the ferocious spirits outside the circles of light let out shrill screams of pain. Once they disappeared, they appeared around the old man's stone platform. They hugged their heads and wailed non-stop, as if there was something they treasured being swiftly taken away from them. They turned into threads of various colors that fused into the old man's body. The ferocious spirits on the remaining mountains roared and moved forward again. There's a gate to the earth, but every single time you fail, 100 years of your memories will be taken away. When you no longer have any memories, your emotions and desires will be taken away. When your emotions and desires are gone, you will be left with your lives, the old man said flatly. He did not look at the wailing, ferocious spirits, but lifted his head and cast his gaze on Su Ming in midair. Welcome, the current master of the 5th kiln. I am Yamu. The old man smiled faintly. Su Ming stared at the old man and did not speak. Do you want to participate in this game? If you don't, then leave behind 1,000 years of your memories, and I will take away 3 of your emotions and desires. Then, for your father's sake, I will let you get out of this place." The old man smiled. However, in Su Ming's eyes, that smile was filled with a strange malevolence. The aloofness in his eyes was a disregard for all manner of lives. "Why wouldn't I want to?" Su Ming stared at the old man. After some time, a smile suddenly appeared on his face as well. That smile also contained a strange malevolence. Fine veins also appeared on his body. They might seem normal, but in truth, they were a Kang's Venus pathways. When a Kang appeared, the malevolence on Su Ming's body immediately turned into malevolence. That malevolent presence spread out in all directions and swept up the fog in the area, forming a rotating vortex around Su Ming's body. The old man was originally smiling. His expression was as calm as ever, but at the instant he saw Su Ming's smile and the malevolent presence, his eyes lit up. He stood up and stared at Su Ming. His eyes sparkled a few times before he laughed loudly. "Good. I only admire one person in my life, but I also hate this person's stubbornness and laughable, lamentable, and foolish loyalty. This person is your grandfather. He is as famous as me and Luya, and he is one of the 3 sublime paragons of the 5th true world. He is also your abyss builder's progenitor. I didn't expect that someone like you would appear among his direct descendants. You are a weirdo who dared to possess a Kang, a creature born from the malevolence of the universe. If you take one more step, you will step into a life of malevolence. Did your father never tell you that the 9 great lives in Old Man Extermination's ballad are existences that the Abyss Builders absolutely cannot possess?" As the old man laughed, his happiness did not seem to be fake. He swung his arm, and the fog beneath Su Ming tumbled about and spread out to reveal an entrance to a tunnel. "The gate to the earth has been opened. I look forward to you becoming my scion. If you succeed, not only will I teach you the mountain shifter art, I will also give you a great serendipity. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 11-12. What's serendipity? Su Ming watched the fog under his feet spreading out to reveal the so-called gate to earth. A glint appeared in his eyes, and he spoke flatly. "A great serendipity that will allow this clone of yours to step into Mastery Realm." A strange light shone in the old man's eyes. As he laughed long and hard, his words traveled out with a loud rumble, causing a brilliant light to appear in Su Ming's eyes. He did not ask any further questions. With one step, he stepped into the entrance of the fog and instantly entered the gate to earth. Once he entered, the world reversed. Su Ming's vision was immediately covered by a powerful layer of light. Loud booming sounds echoed in his ears, and he also felt as if he was moving through water. After a moment, when that feeling disappeared and the powerful light before Su Ming's eyes disappeared, he saw everything around him clearly, and he found himself standing on an inverted mountain. He was at the highest point, but he was at the foot of the mountain. With just one glance, he saw the 10 ferocious spirits formed by the 10 cultivators charging forward. Their goal was the summit at the bottom of the mountain. A freezing glare shone in Su Ming's eyes. At that moment, he might have a ferocious appearance, but his cultivation base had completely recovered. With one move, he charged downwards. He was so quick that even though he was the last, he was still closing in on the mountain. In just a dozen-something breaths, the mountain suddenly started swaying. If Su Ming's cultivation base had disappeared, he would have been incredibly bothered by it. But at that moment, this sort of swaying was insignificant to him. He jumped up and charged forward as if he was falling down. However, when the swaying lasted for several breaths, circles of light suddenly appeared in 9 spots on the mountain. There were 9 spots, but there were 11 ferocious spirits formed by the cultivators. Su Ming was the last. He immediately saw the ferocious spirits formed by the 10 cultivators charging towards the 9 circles of light, as if they had gone mad at the instant they appeared. Some of the stronger ferocious spirits could occupy an entire circle of light, but some of the weaker ones were fighting over it in a frenzy. Booming sounds reverberated in all directions. As Su Ming charged forward, he saw Nian Yin and a ferocious spirit formed by a cultivator fighting for a circle of light. At the same time, a powerful sense of danger rose in Su Ming's heart. It was as if the mountain was sending a dangerous divine thought to all the living beings on it at that moment. Under that divine thought, the light from the 9 circles of light rapidly dimmed. Su Ming also had a strong understanding that once the circles of light completely dimmed, all those who were not in them would have their right to participate in the trial taken away. Their memories would be extracted, and they would become the price for wanting to obtain the legacy. The moment Su Ming closed in on the 9 circles of light, the ferocious spirit that was Nian Yin let out a shrill scream of pain. His head was devoured by the ferocious spirit that was another cultivator. As it chewed on his head, that person stood in the circle of light and started roaring. When Su Ming saw that the 9 circles of light were rapidly dimming, the sense of danger in his heart grew stronger once more. He did not have time to think too much about it. With a step forward, he charged towards the circle of light closest to him. In that circle of light was a ferocious spirit that was 100 feet big. The pustules on his body had been damaged multiple times, and many of them had already dried up. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was also confusion and madness in them. Clearly, he had failed several times before, and an unknown number of years of his memories had been extracted. However, no matter how many memories he had, the faint consciousness that came from his soul still existed. He knew that he could not allow others to snatch away the circle of light he was in. He could not be forced out of the circle of light. Otherwise, the pain of having his 7 emotions and 6 desires extracted would be an unimaginable nightmare for anyone. At the instant Su Ming closed in, the ferocious spirit let out a loud roar. He lifted his swollen right hand, formed a seal, and pointed at Su Ming. With it, the world immediately roared, and a powerful gust of wind rose out of nowhere. It surrounded the area and swiftly gathered on the ferocious spirit's finger. In the end, it turned into a long arc that looked like it could tear through space and charge towards the incoming Su Ming. Killing intent shone in Su Ming's eyes. Not only did he not retreat, he instead became even faster. He leaped up and took a step downwards. He lifted his right hand, and the purplish-black ring on his thumb shone. The life inequity spear appeared in his hand, and at the instant the light from the circle of light was about to completely fade away, he turned into an afterimage and crashed into the incoming long arc. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, Su Ming shot through the long arc and stepped into the circle of light. His speed was so fast that it could not be described with words. When the other ferocious spirits in the area looked over, they only saw a piercing light and heard booming sounds that surged into the sky. When the powerful light disappeared and the booming sounds came to an end, what appeared before the ferocious spirit's eyes was Su Ming standing in the circle of light. Beyond the circle of light was a twitching corpse, and there was a long spear stabbed into the corpse's right eye. Su Ming's expression was aloof. Once he slowly pulled out the long spear, he looked around him coldly. It was also at this moment that the circle of light under his feet disappeared. Soon after, circles of light appeared some distance below him. This time, there were no longer 9 circles of light, but 7. Almost at the instant the 7 circles of light appeared below him, the other 8 ferocious spirits besides Su Ming rushed out at full speed, intending to snatch a spot that belonged to them among the 7 circles of light. Su Ming did not say a single word. He did not think about which circle of light belonged to a ferocious spirit. Instead, he focused his gaze on one of the circles of light, and he would kill whoever tried to snatch it from him. These ferocious spirits might not have been weaklings when they were still cultivators in the past, but they had been in this place for many years. They had lost their memories and emotions due to their repeated failures. Perhaps they had become even more crazed, but compared to the past, they could not compare. This is a game for old Yamu. Over the years, these people have never succeeded. This is enough to tell that Yamu does not want them to succeed. That's why there will definitely be other obstructions during the final fight. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. As he charged forward, he stared at the first circle of light among the 7 circles of light. That's it. As roars reverberated in the air, the ferocious spirits on the mountain spread out and charged towards the 7 circles of light. After a moment, when Su Ming approached the first circle of light, there was another ferocious spirit who had clearly also chosen it. That ferocious spirit was nearly 200 feet tall. When he took a step forward, he stepped into the circle of light almost at the same time as Su Ming. The ferocious spirit roared, and as thunder roared, he clenched his right fist and threw a punch straight at Su Ming. Su Ming lifted his right hand and placed the life inequity spear horizontally in front of him. With it, booming sounds reverberated in the air, and he immediately pushed his left hand against his right hand. With a bang, Su Ming took 3 steps back and stood at the edge of the circle of light. As for the ferocious spirit, he staggered 4 steps back. Once he stepped out of the circle of light, he opened his mouth wide and was just about to roar at Su Ming when killing intent shone in Su Ming's eyes. He opened his mouth before the ferocious spirit and roared at him. This was the first roar Su Ming let out after he took on that ferocious appearance. A heinous, murderous aura erupted from his body with a bang. It swept up the air around him, and as it distorted, the ferocious spirit instinctively took a few steps back. As his pupils shrank, he moved and avoided the circle of light where Su Ming was to rush to another circle of light. The brutal battle in the 7 circles of light immediately reached its most intense state. After a moment, with the price of 2 ferocious spirits dying, there was a ferocious spirit standing in each of the 7 circles of light. What caught Su Ming's attention was a ferocious spirit that was only 80 feet tall, standing in the 7th circle of light. All the boils on its body had shriveled up, and its eyes were lowered slightly. There was a tuft of white fur on its forehead. As it stood there, an ancient air would occasionally appear on its body. Its eyes might seem crimson, but Su Ming could sense that there was clarity hidden under that crimson hue. This was a ferocious spirit that had complete intelligence. What made Su Ming pay attention to this ferocious spirit was that as long as it occupied the circle of light, no other ferocious spirits would fight for it. If he thought about it carefully, he would be able to see some clues. In fact, when Su Ming looked towards it, it seemed to have noticed it and turned its head to cast him a glance. Old Yamu watched this scene with a smile on his face above the fog beyond the mountain, and a brilliant light shone in his eyes. Not bad, not bad. The murderous aura on his body is incredibly thick. He's not someone who has not gone through any trials. If this boy can obtain my legacy, then I will definitely not be stingy with his serendipity. An abyss builder possessed a Kang. This is interesting, very interesting, but I'll have to make the fight even more intense. Only then will I be able to see more. The old man licked his lips. The smile on his face matched his expression, and the malicious air around him became even thicker. Even an endless amount of malicious air spread out from his body. He lifted his right hand and pointed at the mountain under the fog. At that moment, the circles of light where Su Ming and the other ferocious spirits were immediately dimmed down. Once they disappeared, only 2 circles of light appeared on the mountain beneath them. All of a sudden, the number of halos had dropped from 7 to 2. This almost instantly caused the fight for the inheritance to reach a crazy level. Su Ming lifted his head swiftly and looked at the fog above him. He could vaguely see old Yamu's figure. As the 2 circles of light appeared beneath them, besides Su Ming, the other 6 ferocious spirits roared furiously. With bloodshot eyes, they charged forward at a maddening speed. 2 circles of light meant that 5 out of the 7 of them would fail. Are these the rules you set? Su Ming ignored the 6 ferocious spirits who had rushed out. He lifted his head and looked at the indistinct old man in the fog above him, and a freezing glare appeared in his eyes. Choose 2 out of the 7, and then engage in a battle that will please you. Whether the person who emerges in the end will be able to obtain the inheritance will depend on your mood. If you're unwilling, you can directly make him fail, or you can use it as a reward and not extract his memories. I believe that you've been doing this over the years, but this is your rule, not mine. Su Ming turned his head around and looked at the 6 charging ferocious spirits before he closed his eyes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 11:13. At the instant Su Ming closed his eyes, countless veins appeared on his body. In the blink of an eye, they filled his entire body, and an evil and ancient presence erupted from his body with a bang. That presence belonged to a king. At that moment, Su Ming had his Akang clone descend and fuse with it. When he opened his eyes again, the veins on his body looked as if they were branches growing on his skin. A powerful presence spread out swiftly as Su Ming took a step forward. 2 circles of light, 2 spots. Then I'd like to see just how you will play your game if I'm the only one left. When Su Ming took a step forward, the mountain shuddered. When he leaped up, he lifted his right hand, and the life inequity spear erupted with a dazzling light before Su Ming threw it downwards. With a hum, the spear turned into a long arc that sliced through the air and instantly closed in on a ferocious spirit. That ferocious spirit roared and lifted his hands to seize the incoming life inequity spear. But at the instant his hands touched the spear, his arms crumbled. As he screamed in pain, the life inequity spear pierced through the spirit's chest. With a bang, his entire body was pinned to the mountain. As the life inequity spear hummed, the ferocious spirit's screams of pain became even more shrill until they disappeared. 5 more left. Su Ming rushed forward and turned into a purple shadow that charged towards the ferocious spirits. They were originally fighting against each other, and the death of one of them did not bother them in the slightest. As they fought against each other around the 2 circles of light, Su Ming saw, in one of the circles of light, was a ferocious spirit with a tuft of white fur on his head. There was no one around him who wanted to fight against him. He calmly walked into the circle of light, and when he stood there, the ferocious spirits around him did not even look at him. It was as if the place where he stood was a forbidden place for other ferocious spirits. His expression was calm, as if there was nothing around him that could catch his attention. Even Su Ming had only met his gaze for a moment before he was ignored. To be able to leave behind such a strong impact on the people who had their memories continuously extracted and even control their actions, this sort of deep impression was no longer an ordinary memory. It was as if it had been branded into their souls. There was only one possibility for it to be able to do this. In every game that Muya played in this space, it was always this person who successfully made it to the end. It was always him, and there were never any accidents. The other evil spirits were killed by him many times, and that was why the fear that was branded into their souls appeared. That's why he's able to maintain his sanity. That's because, as a reward, every time he comes in first, he won't have any memories extracted. Su Ming's pupil shrank. He cast a deep glance at the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur, then rushed to the spot where the 4 ferocious spirits were fighting against each other. As if they could sense the great threat coming from Su Ming, the 4 ferocious spirits who were fighting against each other turned around simultaneously. Once they saw Su Ming, they rushed out together and charged towards him. In the face of the 4 ferocious spirits who were clearly prepared to work together, Su Ming let out a cold harumph. Before both sides closed in on each other, Su Ming lifted his left hand and patted his storage bag. Immediately, a longbow appeared in his left hand. This bow was the treasure Su Ming had obtained during the battle against the Sand Earthlings. At that moment, he held it in his hand and drew the bowstring with his right hand. With a hum, 3 sand arrows gathered in the air and shot out. With a whoosh, the 3 arrows let out the same sound. It was piercing to the ears, and the sound of air being sliced apart reverberated in the air as they charged towards 3 of the 4 ferocious spirits. Booming sounds reverberated in the air. Just as the 3 ferocious spirits were about to dodge, the 3 arrows crumbled and exploded at the same time. The impact caused the three ferocious spirits to freeze for a moment. Because of it, the final ferocious spirit was revealed, and he was forced to face the incoming Su Ming alone. Su Ming was not unfamiliar with this ferocious spirit. It was the spirit who had dragged Nian Yin away in the fog and shouted those words. Both sides instantly closed in on each other. Loud booming sounds shook the sky and earth. The ferocious spirit let out a shrill roar, but his body came to a halt in midair, and Su Ming swept past his body. When Su Ming left into the distance, the head of the ferocious spirit in midair crumbled and fell on the mountain, still and unmoving. Immediately after, Su Ming did not stop. He rushed towards the three ferocious spirits whose speed had been slowed down by the arrows just then. When he closed in on them, the God Ascension poisonous wasp stinger in Su Ming's clenched right hand stabbed into his body. The injection of God Ascension nectar caused Su Ming to lift his head swiftly. The veins on his face became even denser, and a powerful and domineering life force rampaged through his body, causing his eyes to fill with blood. He took a step forward and charged forward with loud bangs. A feeling as if his body was about to explode from being filled to the brim caused waves of unbearable pain to surge through Su Ming's entire body. In the midst of that intense pain, Su Ming felt as if his entire body was on fire. The Akang body in his body also seemed to have gone through a change that Su Ming did not expect under the stimulation of the God Ascension nectar. The source of this change was a cracking sound that only Su Ming could hear coming from his body. This change caused Su Ming to immediately give up on the illusion of stars, sun, and moon he had originally intended to use to fight against the three ferocious spirits and kill one of them in the fight. He had originally intended to use this divine ability to kill one person so that it would be much easier for him to deal with the other two. Yet now, as the Akang body in his body changed, the feeling as if his entire body was about to explode reached its peak. He could clearly sense that if he did not vent the God Ascension nectar, then his body would immediately crumble. This was something he had not expected. What Su Ming did not know was that when he saved the resentful Wei, he had already stored a large amount of God Ascension nectar in his body. It might have been suppressed, but if he had more time, he could slowly absorb and refine it. However, there had only been a short amount of time since then. When he poured in the God Ascension nectar once more, it caused the God Ascension nectar in his body to boil. It was this that caused his body to be in danger at that moment, and it was also because of this danger and the large amount of God Ascension nectar that caused the change in Su Ming's Akang body. Su Ming did not know whether this change was good or bad, but he did not have time to think too much about it, because as the three ferocious spirits roared, they had already closed in on him. Ripples of power erupted from their bodies, and they brought out their strongest power, intending to kill Su Ming in one go. Su Ming's eyes were bloodshot. During this moment of danger, he no longer hesitated. He went along with the change in Akang's body according to the will of the Akang body in his body. At the instant Su Ming chose to go along with it, intense pain immediately descended on his body once more. As he coughed up more blood, purplish-red branches grew out from his body. In the midst of the intense pain, Su Ming discovered to his shock that the Akang clone that had fused into his body was in human form, but at that moment, it had turned into Akang's real body. The body that should have been incredibly huge in the world outside and could occupy the galaxy had shrunk several times its original size and existed within Su Ming's body. This was the change that came from Akang, and it was also the first time Su Ming experienced such a drastic change. At the same time, the three ferocious spirits closed in on him. Booming sounds rose swiftly into the air, and as they spread out in all directions, shrill screams of pain that were several times louder than those of the other ferocious spirits rang out madly in the world. Just listening to those shrill cries was enough to make all those who heard them feel their skins crawl. There was an indescribable amount of pain and misery contained within them. In fact, at that moment, the ferocious spirit with the tuft of white fur on his head who was originally standing in the circle of light with a calm expression on his face, as if nothing around him could attract his attention and was indifferent to Su Ming, suddenly narrowed his eyes. He stared at Su Ming, and his breathing instantly quickened. Disbelief appeared in his eyes. He was not the only one. A drastic change happened to a Kang's body in Su Ming's body. Countless branches spread out from his body, and the booming sounds could not drown out the shrill screams that clearly did not belong to Su Ming. At the same time, old Yamu, who had been watching the fight beneath him in a calm and composed manner, stood up swiftly from his originally seated position in the fog above him. The air around him distorted. His hair moved without wind, and a rare look of shock appeared in his eyes. His breathing quickened, and his eyes sparkled. This is... Abyss Builders cannot possess the 9 great lives in Old Man Extermination's ballad. This is strictly forbidden. This child possessed a Kang, and that was already an incredibly heaven-defying act. But a Kang isn't complete. It's just a part of it. Possession might be heaven-defying, but it's still acceptable. But a Kang's body belongs to the laws, and it definitely won't belong to this child. In the future, once a Kang becomes complete, this child will definitely be restricted by the laws. Either he will be devoured by a Kang, or he will have to be split apart. But he has actually fused perfectly with a part of a Kang's will. This part of a Kang's state of being has actually increased, and with a part of its body, it has obtained the state of a complete body. From then on, they will become one, and there will no longer be any distinction between them. He is a Kang, and a Kang is him. This is a fact that not even the laws can change. Even if a Kang becomes complete in the future, it will still be the same. While old Yamu was in shock, the dimension in the area suddenly swayed, and signs that it was about to shatter appeared. In fact, this was not the only place that shook. The entire 5th kiln trembled with a bang. With the old man's divine abilities, he could sense that the entire arid triad expanse cosmos beyond the 5th kiln shuddered at that instant. This shudder caused the 4 great true worlds and all of arid triad expanse cosmos to instantly burst into an uproar. The galaxy rippled, the planets shuddered, and the universe looked as if it was about to close its eyes and be extinguished. It was especially so for the remaining Ikang souls in Western Ring, Nebula's foreign land, in the barren lands of divine essence. They roared together, and there was endless fear and shock in their roars. Su Xianyi, what did you do for your son? The old man's heart trembled violently. He instinctively lifted his hand, and a fierce killing intent appeared in his eyes. As one of the inspectors of arid triad expanse cosmos, I have a responsibility to destroy all lives that interfere with the laws. This child's existence has already interfered with the changes in the laws. Yet at the instant the old man was about to attack, his expression suddenly changed drastically again. He lifted his head swiftly and stared at the sky. An incredibly wary look appeared on his face, and, at the same time, he said 3 words. Su Xianyi, a will that shook the sky and earth and caused an endless sea of fire to erupt from the entire 5th kiln, descended swiftly, requesting recommendation votes to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Start Point and cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1114. Wind stirred and clouds surged in the sky. As the world roared, fog tumbled about in all directions, and a gigantic shadow appeared out of nowhere. It looked as if it had walked out of space to stand in the sky. That figure was several hundreds of feet tall. He was dressed in golden armor and looked like a war immortal. As his long hair danced in the air, his golden face was revealed. There was not a hint of emotion on that face, and it was as aloof as metal. However, there was a long chain wrapped around the figure's shoulders. It was a chain that stretched to the depths of the sky. However, what caused old Yamu's pupils to shrink was not this person. Yamu's gaze did not land on this person either. Instead, he was staring at the depths of the space where the chain stretched. This person was not Su Xianyi. At that moment, an incredibly powerful will descended on the ground with a bang. The fog tumbled about beside the golden figure, and golden light spread to 100,000 feet. Another golden figure walked out from the air. They had the same height, the same awe-inspiring presence, the same expressionless face, and the same chains wrapped around their bodies. Almost at the instant the second golden figure appeared, another boundless golden light shone beside it. In a piercing manner, a third golden figure appeared. 3 golden-armored giants, 3 golden figures with chains on their bodies, roared in unison after they appeared. All of them bent down, as if they were pulling on the chains, and walked forward. Booming sounds shook the sky and earth, but Su Ming could not hear a single sound while he was in the fog. In fact, he did not even have the time to pay attention to the tumbling fog above him. At that moment, as intense pain filled his entire body and the God Ascension nectar in his body spilled out, the madness that made him want to explode erupted in response to the drastic change in his Akang clone. As it erupted and the 3 ferocious spirits screamed in pain around him, Su Ming's mind cleared up once again. With just one glance, he saw the 3 ferocious spirits beside him floating in the air. Their bodies were pierced through by numerous branches, and those branches were growing out of Su Ming's body. Shrill howls burst from the mouths of the 3 evil spirits. Their faces were filled with pain. Their bodies were withering rapidly, as if the branches that had penetrated into their bodies were rapidly devouring their flesh and blood essence, their cultivation bases, and their souls. In fact, Su Ming could clearly see veins popping up on the 3 ferocious spirits' bodies and squirming nonstop. However, that was not due to blood, and neither was it due to spasms. Instead, it was because Su Ming's branch was swiftly spreading through the 3 ferocious spirits' bodies. To Su Ming, the branches were a part of his body, and they were inseparable. He could clearly sense their actions, and he could even control them slightly. As he sensed this, Su Ming's heart trembled furiously, because he saw that the branches that had spread out from his body could devour the 3 ferocious spirits' flesh, blood, and cultivation bases, and make them let out such shrill screams of pain. It was because the branches were not simply devouring them, but were swiftly breaking down the 3 ferocious spirits' bodies. It was as if the branches were using an incredibly fast speed to search for the flaws in the 3 ferocious spirits' bodies and the parts they lacked. Once they used them, they would get rid of them in one go. This scene was similar to when Su Ming had encountered the waves of tears in Divine Essence Star Ocean. He had turned into Old Man Extermination, and after conducting countless years of research, he had found the flaws that caused the waves of tears to be exterminated. Su Ming's heart trembled. A picture swiftly rose in his head. It was the one he had seen in the Seed of Life Extermination before. In it, Old Man Extermination was facing the numerous living beings offering sacrifices to a gigantic, ancient ship in the galaxy. With just one wave of his hand, he instantly learned of the flaws in their lives. This scene had shocked Su Ming. He had once longed for it, but he knew that it was something far beyond his reach. Yet now, a brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes. He noticed that he was no longer so far away from the Old Man Extermination in the picture. Akang's transformation is due to the God Ascension nectar, but the main reason is because of the Seed of Life Extermination. Su Ming did not know just how great of a shock his Akang clone had caused to the entire arid triad expanse cosmos when he fused perfectly with his body. Neither did he know that old Yamu was staring at space warily in the world beyond the fog above him. In the void, as the 3 golden-armored giants bent their waists and took a step to turn the iron chains, booming sounds reverberated in all directions. Gradually, a huge silhouette appeared in Yamu's eyes. It was a war chariot that was completely golden and looked like the sun. The war chariot was 1,000 feet big. Just its outline alone immediately brought about a powerful, mighty pressure to Yamu, causing the 5th kiln to roar. Endless seas of fire surged into the sky. Su Xian, Old Yamu lifted his right hand and clenched his fist in front of him. Immediately, black light shone in his fist. When he opened his hand to reveal his palm, a black ball of light appeared on his palm. The blackness of the ball of light was like an abyss that devoured all light in the world. There were countless illusory figures constantly flashing within it, and every time they flashed, a different mountain would appear. In just a few breaths' time, tens of millions of mountains had appeared within it. Yamu stared at space, and the wariness in his eyes was replaced by a powerful fighting spirit. It was as if he was waiting for the indistinct outline to become corporeal and reveal the second strongest abyss builders in the fifth true world. Sushieni. This was the prodigy that abyss builders' progenitor predicted would definitely surpass him in the future. At the instant Yamu looked at space, the booming sounds reached their strongest point. As they rumbled, the three giants in golden armor roared at the same time and took a swift step forward to tug at the chains. The indistinct war chariot looked as if it had been dragged out of an illusion and into the real world. The world instantly turned golden. The golden sky, the golden land, the golden fog, and the golden space revealed a golden war chariot. There was also a figure dressed in a golden robe standing on the war chariot. His white hair fluttered in the wind as if it had been dyed gold. It was a man, an extremely handsome middle-aged man who seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life. His eyes were cold, and his countenance was like metal. His body exuded a merciless coldness, as if there was not a shred of human emotion on his body. Old Yamu stared at the aloof man on the golden war chariot and asked in a low voice, "Which clone of Su Xianyi are you?" "The third clone." As the middle-aged man spoke flatly, he lifted his right hand. Immediately, an endless amount of golden light shone on his right hand and turned into a long sword. That sword was about 10 feet long, and its edges were sharp. With just a slight swing, the sound of space being torn apart rang out. "Are you the one who wants to hurt my Ming heir?" The coldness in the middle-aged man's eyes became even colder. He did not speak much, but when he did, the entire world instantly felt as if it had been plunged into ice that had been frozen for 10,000 years. Cracking sounds rose in the air around them, and signs of freezing appeared. That ice spread out swiftly like a spider's web, causing the sky to instantly turn into a huge ice flower. Old Yamu's expression changed. Just as he was about to speak, the middle-aged man at the center of the ice flower and the war chariot in the sky lifted the long sword in his hand and swung it at the ground in a simple slash. That slash sealed the world in ice. The ice flower instantly covered the ground, causing the world to turn into a complete ice flower. That slash also cut through the laws, causing the world to rumble as if it had been cut in half. Fighting spirit rose in old Yamu's eyes. The black ball of light in his right hand instantly shone with a black light. That light spread through the ice flower, as if it wanted to dye it black. When he lifted his right hand, he swung it at the incoming slash. Immediately, the black ball of light charged into the sky and crashed into the middle-aged man's slash in midair. Mountain shifter. Old Yamu formed a seal with his hands. Once the mark of a mountain was formed above his head, he swung his arms outwards. Immediately, an even deeper black light erupted from the black ball of light in the sky. The tens of millions of mountains within it seemed to have appeared in the sky at the same time. This scene might seem bizarre, but in truth, at that moment, the sky had already been filled with mountains. Booming sounds reverberated in the air. Those were the booming sounds formed by the continuous crumbling of mountains. Old Yamu's face turned even paler. Once he swung his arms, he immediately gathered them in front of him. He pressed his palms together to form the shape of a mountain's tip before he thrust them at the sky. Booming sounds shook the sky once more. As the tens of millions of mountains in the air trembled, a ray of golden light swept through the area and cut down from the mountains. It moved like a hot knife through butter. Once they crumbled layer by layer, the golden light formed by the long sword instantly cut through all the mountains. Old Yamu's face turned pale. He coughed up a mouthful of blood. When he fell back, the mountains in the sky crumbled, and the golden light cut down from the sky. It appeared 3 inches away from old Yamu's head and stopped moving. However, the chills spreading out from it had already frozen old Yamu's entire body. The sharp glare on the sword also caused a crack to appear at the center of his brows. I respect you as a senior. Go and fulfill your promise. Let him inherit your mountain shifter art and give Ming heir as serendipity. An aloof voice came from the sky, and the ice flowers in the area became even colder. If my real body was an arid triad expanse cosmos, your sword mold style would not have been able to withstand my mountain shifter art before it reached the 5th echelon. Old Yamu lifted his head. He did not even look at the golden sword above his head. Instead, he stared at the indistinct golden war chariot in the sky as the mountains crumbled. This is the 5th kiln, and I am just the 3rd clone, the middle-aged man on the war chariot said flatly. Said the middle-aged man in the war chariot coolly. His body gradually disappeared, and the 3 giants in golden armor slowly merged into the air. When he completely vanished, the ice crystals in the world slowly shrank. When the world returned to normal, the golden sword above old Yamu's head turned into nothingness. == Crooked Wise 3rd anniversary. The event will start at 8 in the evening. If you have time, you can go and interact with it through voice chat. Later on, I will go and take a look as well. To be continued. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Starting Point and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.